Now, when we're done today, you can immediately see what we just did. Okay, what was my question? What did I just promise to ask you? I didn't ask you the question yet. And now I forgot it. Oh, the letdown, the build up and the letdown. I'm sure I'll remember it in a minute. Anybody have an idea? I need a rewind button. Something was a good test question. Oh, that's just mean. What a terrible thing to do to you guys. I promise I'll remember it. I always remember them right after I embarrass myself and admit that I don't remember. Thinking, processing. Okay, don't try too hard. It won't come back. It will come back. Okay, so market value is what we think. The sales price is what it actually sold for. Oh, that's it. Got it. See, you cannot adjust the subject property. You don't subtract or add, as we will see in a moment, because that's what we're going to cover today. You do not adjust for the garage on the sale price of the subject property. In other words, if the subject property has a one-car garage, right, the subject being the one that we need to figure out the value of, and a comparable down the street sold last week that had a two-car garage, that comparable sold for $200,000. It had a two-car garage. The one you're going to be hired to list has a one-car garage. Is it worth more or less than that one that sold down the street based on garages? Let's see. Can you see me? Let me get myself out of my way. Yeah. Okay. Hands, right? Subject property right here. Comparable property right here. The comparable has a two-car garage. It is superior. It is greater than, has more than the subject. What do we need to do to get this comparable properties valuation down to match the subject? We need to subtract from what it sold for because it has more stuff. It has one more garage than the subject does. That makes sense? So we're going to subtract the value of a garage in order to bring that $200,000, which it sold for, down to what the subject is probably worth. Next question is, how much is a garage worth? There is no secret formula. There is no magical sheet with values on it. It comes from your knowledge of the area. It comes from your resources, like appraisers, by the way. Try to meet lots of appraisers so that you have resources. Some are nice and will give you their card and say, hey, call me whenever you have a question. And maybe that's in the same neighborhood as what you're trying to list a house in. You call them and say, what do you give for a value out here in this neighborhood for a one-car garage difference? And they might say, oh, that's probably, I do $8,000. So if the comparable down the street sold for $200,000 and your subject that you're going to list is exactly the same except for the garage and it has one less garage, then we're going to assume that that subject is deduce. Let's use deduce, not assume. We're going to deduce that that subject is worth, what did I say, 192. 192,000, 8,000 less than what the comparable sold for. We're basing it on what the comparable sold for. We're making adjustments for the various amenities, extras, things like square footage, garage, bathrooms, brick versus vinyl, acreage differences, land size, lot size differences. Condition could enter into the mix. And we'll talk a little more about that today. So sales price is what we need to look at. We're going to look up sold comps in the MLS. For some people getting their license, that is the reason they're getting their license. They want to do their own real estate, but they want that MLS access so they can figure out what things are worth based on what the history of solds looks like. Tax records are okay, but they're slower. They're often wrong. In the MLS, you just can't beat it for more accuracy, more comprehensive data. And then cost. This is the one that we battle the owner with without them knowing it, but we're very nicely trying to help them understand that no, that $30,000 you spent on the pool is probably not going to translate to another 30 in your pocket. It's sort of like a car. Pools are sort of like cars. Hope you enjoyed it while you were here. Probably not getting it back dollar for dollar. Some things you do get back dollar for dollar or even more. Better things to expect a return would be kitchens and bathrooms. Things that are, and then the other issue is not even just automatically kitchens and baths, but what do the comparables have? What do your competition have? You're going to go on the market next week. What are buyers going to be picking from amongst yours? Where are they going to go look after they leave your listing? And does that have a pool? Do they all have pools? Then the fact that your listing does not is probably going to hurt you. None of them have pools, and the fact that your listing does is going to certainly be a benefit, but that still doesn't mean that a pool is going to bring you back whatever they spent on it, right? Pools are tough like that. But you've got to talk to that owner, help them understand some of this money you spent on this thing, this upgrade in your mind, it was for your own enjoyment, not necessarily going to translate to your bottom line. Factors that influence value, we started getting into this. Social factors, maybe clubs in the HOA of that neighborhood. Economic factors, companies paying a lot, moving in, leaving, people leaving, companies leaving, taking their workers with. A lot of people putting houses on the market because the big company like Corning or something is out of here now. They're going away. Therefore, a lot of people selling at the same time. It's going to put a lot of inventory on the market at the same time. Buyers would have more to pick from, in which case, in a neutral market, and all of a sudden you have an influx of listings, buyers kind of getting the benefit there, right? Buyers have a lot to pick from. Political, that'd be like taxes, economic uncertainty, and maybe who's coming into office with certain plans and campaign promises. Physical characteristics like natural disaster potential. This is where we left off, principles of value. We're going to look at these different principles of value, how they affect valuation. Anticipation would be what? What's an example maybe of anticipation? The principle of anticipation. Something was promised to come in there. Maybe one of those signs shows up on the side of the road saying this new development's coming in. Maybe it's a new commercial development and people are really excited about it. That could cause anticipation, and maybe going to the zoning office, verifying that that's a thing, that it's coming, maybe a road going through. Those are principles of anticipation, which increase, or in this case increase, but affect the valuation. Could be the opposite. There was a time on my street, there is a daycare and a church. Well, the church is gone, but the daycare and a secondary charter school and all that's great. But before it all came in, there was talk by one of the neighbors at the end of the road of selling to the asphalt plant. Boy, those were stressful times. I would have had dump trucks hauling smelly asphalt in front of my house all day long, every day. That would have killed my property value. Thank goodness they did not sell to them. They gave it to the church. The church built a daycare. If I'm going to have traffic up and down the road, which I'm happy to have because car count on the road in front of a commercial industrial property is a good thing, and I don't mind it because of the eventual sale. The asphalt plant went in about a mile down the road away, right? But it all kind of depends, that anticipation. What about the principle of change? There's Charlotte 100 years ago on the left. There's me. That's me on the bicycle there in the middle of the road, and got a better bike now. And that's Charlotte today-ish.
No, that's me. That's me, Neil.
No, you're walking.
Yeah, I'm walking barely.
And there it is. Over time, Charlotte, North Carolina changes. Things happen. Things change, and that affects value. There's a cycle in real estate. There's a cycle in business. There's a cycle in economics. In real estate, you might have the new, sexy, up-and-coming neighborhood go in that everybody's excited about. When I got in the business in 1996, Highland Creek in Northeast Charlotte was the new up and coming thing. That neighborhood, I think they might have had 1,000 houses in there, eventually 4,000 plus. And they might have had one swim and tennis, and they now have several. Well, over time, neighborhoods kind of get to be aged. They kind of get a little dated. Houses are all, from the 80s and 90s, the houses were all decorated in good old burgundy and dark hunter green and navy and gold. And the fixtures were brass, what I call grandma brass, not the cool etched or, oiled bronze look, but like glossy, bright yellow brass. And, you know, tastes change, trends and fads change. So those properties kind of become, oh, where's the new kid on the block? This is the old one. This one's been around 15, 20 years. You're probably going to get more for your money there because it needs updates. There's a neighborhood in Concord called Carriage Downs that is older like that, built in the 80s and 90s. It's like that, exactly like that. Floor plans change. Remember in the 90s and 2000s when everybody started building houses that were wide open inside? Kitchens flowed into dining rooms, and that was great for the model home. But in real life, in practical application, if you have two groups of people over to entertain at the same time, it gets a little noisy. Anybody discover that? The one spouse's group, is talking, having a good time, and the other spouse's group can hear everything going on in the kind of the same other end of the room. And maybe we don't want quite that open. Then we kind of saw how let's not have as open, maybe just the kitchen into the living room, but let's then have a study. Let's have another separate den. People kind of tweak things. And then a lot of 2-story foyers, a lot of 2-story living rooms, which look cool. They allow you to put a large Christmas tree up and decorate it in a certain way. But maybe heating and air costs get a little more expensive. There's ups and downs. And then we saw the compromise, not standard 9 and 10 foot ceilings on the main level. Get rid of the 2-story foyer, but let's at least have that height down there and sometimes upstairs too. Things change. Things make the new thing more attractive. It cycles out. And then maybe there is a re-interest like Madison Park in downtown Charlotte. Madison Park, got a call one day and a lady on the phone said, "You remember me?" And it was my ex-girlfriend. And after we dated and broke up, which was amenable, we were not mad at each other. About a year after that, she got together with a guy, and they didn't get married, but they ended up having a kid. No, they did get married. Yeah, they got married. And then they split up, but they never officially divorced. But they were great together raising the kid. They stayed close. They traded off. They were intentionally very kind to each other. And she called me and said, "I want to sell my house in Madison Park." And I found out, oh, wait, you were married? Okay, we need his signature too. And I'm thinking, oh boy, because I went over there thinking I was just going to be dealing with her. Found out she was married. And yeah, but we're practically divorced, and that's always a red flag. What's that mean? Remember that? Okay, we need his signature too. Well, he'll sign it. He'll do whatever I ask him to do because we're good like that. I'm like, I hope so. I really hope that's true. And it was. It all worked out. But that house needed a lot of work. Madison Park, built in the 50s. And this one had been rented. She had lived there a little bit, but then she moved away, and then she had rented it. And it needed a lot of work. And I sold it to a buyer represented by a brand new agent. Fast forward a year, I think it was a year later, I was teaching one of my first post-licensing classes, and that agent was in the class. And we had had a couple of little dust-ups during the transaction. She was not my biggest fan. So I looked out in the crowd of my class I'm teaching, and there's that face looking at me and not smiling. And at one point in the class, I intentionally made a joke and brought her into it. I said, "So-and-so, you remember that house in Madison Park? What did you think?" And blah, blah, blah. And I brought her in, and she lightened up. She warmed up. And the next week in one of the last post classes, she said, "You'd never believe it. In this last week, my seller or my buyer from that very house called me, wants to put it back on the market. They put $50,000 in it, and now they want to sell it." That was weird. Weird coincidence. So she showed me the pictures. It was gorgeous. Somebody had bought it and flipped it. Not flipped it. They lived there, but they renovated it, made it gorgeous again. That was the cycle. It was brand new in the 50s. It fell into disrepair along with all the others, 20 years later, and then kind of got popular again. And it's hot, going strong these days. So the principle of change, principle of competition says the more competition there is, the lower the price you can expect to receive, basically, right? What's similar on the market? It's also the principle that fast food restaurants live by. I like to say you'll never see a lonely McDonald's. McDonald's is never lonely. There's always somebody right across the street in competition, right? There's always another one nearby. It might be, in the case of Starbucks, there's literally another Starbucks nearby. In the case of fast food, there's 4 or 5 options within walking distance. Did I hear somebody talking that had a question or comment? Nope. Okay. Conformity in people, the more unique a person is, quite often, let's be positive, the more they might see success, especially in like the entertainment business. Somebody who's really talented, uniquely talented, are probably going to rise to the top. In real estate, lack of conformity is usually a price killer, a value killer. This house in the middle is called a geodesic dome. You see them out in the west sometimes, and you've seen them here. I've seen them here from time to time. Thing is, there's not a lot of buyers for that. It's a very unique look. It might very well be energy efficient and have lots of pluses, but the vast majority, the vast buying pool, probably not picking that one. They're going to want the ones that are more traditional, more like the others nearby, whatever that is. In California and Florida, that might be a contemporary style. Here, contemporary styles are also not the norm. Who likes them? Who likes those contemporary style? There's no right or wrong answer. I like them. They're nice and clean and crispy. They often they have a fireplace, but they don't have a mantle maybe or a hearth. They have no shutters on the windows out front. And we see some hybrid styles out there, some that might look contemporary on the outside, but are traditional on the inside. So the more different it is, the less value it might carry in real estate. The ones there on the right are solid. We know what similar ones sold for. It's also harder to put a value on the different ones. There's not a whole neighborhood of geodesic domes from which to choose and draw comparable sales to base a value on. And that's what also makes it more difficult. It takes it longer to sell. Therefore, the longer something takes to sell, as a general rule, the less you're going to expect to get for it. So that's sort of a problem for somebody who's trying to sell for the most. I had one lady call me, and I listed the house, and it was indeed a geodesic dome in sort of the Harrisburg, Concord area. And her husband was all about it. He had built it himself, but then he died. Like an unexpected young man, middle-aged guy dying. Left her with this house. And it was just so different. And we tried and tried, but we just could not find that price and that buyer for that house. I think she decided to end up staying there. One of her complaints was there was not an attached garage or any garage. So I drove by one day after I lost the listing, after she gave up. There was a 2-car garage being built. So I think she just gave up and decided, let's just make it the best we can. The principle of contribution. It's the idea that things you do to the property either add or subtract value. And the classic case of the pool may or may not add value. It's going to depend on a lot of things that we just talked about a little bit ago. How popular are pools? If it's a Lake Norman area property or a beach property, might be kind of expected to have a pool. If it's a property in town, in the city, a pool is going to be a little more of an anomaly and therefore maybe add more value. If you have it and all the ones that sold nearby don't, and more importantly, all the ones that are currently available along with yours don't, but you do, you could expect to get more. This principle of highest and best use, we left on Monday talking about how this is what an appraiser is asking as part of their duties doing that appraisal report. They're wanting to know, are they using it to their highest and best use? Are they using the property to its highest and best use? In my case, the house I own, living in it, just a regular old residential use, but that's not the actual zoned purpose of industrial. It's not being put, probably not being put to its highest and best use. It would be worth more if somebody came in and put an office park here on these 5 acres than one little old house and a bunch of woods that I complain about having to pay taxes on. That's it. So highest and best use is the most important out of this entire list of principles of value. Highest and best use is a testable question. Understand this concept of highest and best use. I don't have the slide. I'm going to try to find it at a break because I like some of those a little better. But I have a slide that's got on the left side, it's a overhead view of a farm, and you can see the farm still in operation on the right. And on the left side is a neighborhood, like a traditional cookie cutter neighborhood. And I'll show that during this highest and best use, and I'll say, is that farm being put to its highest and best use? And the question is, depends on how much it's making with the crops that it grows. Maybe in Denver, when those crops are, I don't know, maybe smokable, legally smokable, that might be a pretty expensive and highly valued, highest and best use. But in general, if it's soybeans or something like that, that farmer might die, and those kids of that farmer who didn't want to do any farming, they're going to be seeing dollar signs. They're going to sell to that developer so for more houses to go in. Not saying it's right or wrong, just saying it's probably going to be worth more putting more houses on, like the neighbor next door. That subdivision getting a phase 5 of more houses where the farm used to be, right? The principle of substitution says all other things being equal, two houses being equal should be worth the same, so that if one of those sellers maybe is more desperate than another and they put a reduction on their house and the one on the left is asking $200,000, the one on the right does a price reduction to $190,000. With everything else being the same, buyers are going to buy the one on the right. They're going to want more for their money. That is not a unique principle in real estate. It is applicable everywhere goods are purchased, right? It's what eBay is all about. It's what Facebook Marketplace is all about. It's why you settle for the used product, the used guitar, instead of the new one. If you know how to buy a guitar right, you can basically play a guitar for free because you buy it at a used price. It's in decent shape. You play it as much as you want. In a year or 2 years from now, you sell it basically for what you paid for it, or maybe even a little more. So you're playing the guitar for free. But if you bought that brand new at Guitar Center, nope. They have a profit margin built in. You're paying more for the brand new. As soon as you drive it off the lot, just like a car, that guitar is losing value. So, principle of substitution. The cheaper thing is going to get sold first. I bought one a couple of months ago. It was advertised as used, but when I got it, this gorgeous guitar looked brand new to me. Then I paid $500 less than the new price. So I know that I'm going to be able to get everything back. I'm going to get to play it for as long as I want to, and I'm going to be playing that one for free. Rent free, basically. Principle of supply and demand. As demand goes up, but supply is unchanged there on the top line, what's happening to price? Prices are going up. Supply doesn't change, but there's more demand for what is there. Therefore, seller's market, right? Therefore, prices can start going up, as we saw several years ago. That appreciation slope angle was going up gradually 5-6 years ago, got steeper and steeper in these last couple of years. Now it's starting to get shallower again. If demand goes down and supply is unchanged, there's fewer buyers interested in buying what's there, then prices are going to come down naturally. Principles of economics. If the demand is unchanged, no more or less people want to buy stuff, but the supply goes up, then they have even more of a choice. We're back to a buyer's market again. Therefore, prices come down. Right now, it's a seller's market still, even though there's a shift. So buyers maybe aren't as frantic about making competing offers, but the seller can still say, no, I'm kind of calling the shots. I kind of want this and that and the other. Not as extreme as it was, but still. Can you imagine the opposite kind of market, a buyer's market? 180 degrees different than this, where the buyer goes to the seller, makes them an offer, and the seller says, first of all, the buyer would make an offer 10, 20% less than asking price. The buyer might not even give the seller due diligence money, maybe not even earnest money. The buyer might also say, I want my due diligence period to go all the way up to the day before closing. And I want to close in 2 months because that's more convenient for me. And I want you to include a home warranty. And what the seller already put in place just to get a chance at the buyer is a bonus to the agent. You see agent bonuses in buyers markets because sellers are looking for any way to get the attention of a buyer or their agent. And oftentimes the builders get in on that action. The builder will say, hey, if you write a contract with us for one of our properties before the end of the month, then we will give you a $2,000 agent bonus. And we're already paying you a 3% commission instead of a 2.5% that we may be used to. So supply and demand. Yeah, Margie in the chat. Huge principle in real estate, in economics. It definitely applies here. Demand is unchanged. Supply goes down. We have increased prices. So, testable question. How many highest and best uses for a property can there be at any one given time?
Neil,
Yes. Yes.
could you go back one to that previous slide?
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't take a screenshot of this, this is a great slide, not only for you to study, but it's also a great slide as a tool when you're trying to explain something to your clients.
Yeah, that is a good point. These are, as you're in the business and as you run across good ideas like that, you'll start a folder or a file, whether whether electronic or in writing, and you're putting together sort of a resource book to use both for making content to draw people in, but also for your listing appointments. You want to be able to explain to that buyer or seller, not just listing appointments, but any sort of upfront consultation. If it's a consultation with the buyer or with the seller, it's good to keep track of those things and take Margie's advice. It's one of those things just to hang on to. Okay. So, how many highest and best uses? There we go. Whoever else has not answered. How many highest and best uses for a property can there be at any one given time? One. There's only one highest and best use. Not that it's the same one for the entire life of the property. It can change. Mine changed. My parents first rented this house, which they bought, owner financed, bought from the seller. It was maybe even agricultural, but it was at least residential, and then it changed. Highest and best use. At any given moment, there is one. The process of valuation. We're talking about the appraisal process now. There are steps in the process. First of all, define the problem. I'm going to fast forward, then we'll get into the meat of this. The first step, this is a testable item. The first step in the valuation process, define the problem. The last step, reconcile the valuations. Define starts with define, it ends with reconciliation. You're looking at what you figured out all the different methods of valuation were, and you're reconciling them based on what the property type is. It'll make more sense in a moment. So first step, define the problem. The appraiser sees what they need to accomplish. I need to figure out what this is worth. This is a single family, one level house in a traditional neighborhood. It's a planned unit development, or a PUD, planned unit development. It's in a popular area of town. What is it worth? Define the problem. They're going to then determine the scope of the case, of the problem. They're going to go out and see the property. They're going to measure it. If it's an FHA or a VA appraiser, they're also going to be required to do some extra steps like pay particular attention to the roof and the condition of the roof, and take pictures of the water running from the faucets in the sinks. And for FHA loans, they're going to verify there's a working range oven. Can't sell a house with FHA loan money if it doesn't have a working range. Sometimes the vacant houses get stripped. It was maybe a foreclosure or a tenant that was terrible, and they left and they took stuff with them, including smoke detectors and the range. And they broke windows and they put big holes in the wall, like suspiciously fist-sized holes in the wall. That's always sad. All of those things could be big fat red marks on an FHA appraisal. So as that FHA appraiser is collecting and analyzing the data by going and doing the in-person visit, they're noting, oh, we can't give you money. The seller's going to need to get all this stuff fixed. Can't have broken windows for FHA. Can't have significant holes in walls. It has to have a working range. And if the roof has a little bit of life left on it, can't have that either. Don't forget, a little mini review from finance. FHA and VA buyers are trying to be helped by the government. The government's saying, look, we're trying to give you a step up, a step in the right direction. Therefore, we're not going to let you buy a house that ends up costing you money too soon. All houses cost money eventually, like upkeep, maintenance. But they're not going to give you funding if you're going to need a new roof next year. That could very easily lead to default of the loan because they got to spend money keeping the rain out. They can't make their house payment, and they're already getting in with no down payment, and their credit's not great. And so payment amount is really important. So that's FHA and VA appraisals that are a little more strict. Conventional appraisal, not as strict. They're not looking quite at the same things, but they are collecting and analyzing the data. When COVID first hit, I had one under contract and the appraiser came out there. This was an anomaly. I know the guy too. I have him on Facebook and it's all I can do not to make comments sometimes. He came out to my house, my listing, and it was a new mom, brand new little infant in the house. Thank goodness her mom was with her. And she opened the door to this guy. He had not made an appointment. Appraisers should make appointments. He just showed up. He said, oh, because of COVID, I can't walk through the house and I'm not going to measure. But yet he did walk through the house to the backyard. Instead of walking around, he had to go out and it didn't make any sense. I think he was just trying to fit it in real quick. He used my measurement. That's unheard of. Appraisers need to measure it themselves. They're better at it than we are. He also valued it $11,000 less than what it really was worth because he used comps from around the corner. And when I saw the comp he used, a bigger house that sold for less than we were asking, I went ahead and called the listing agent and said, what was up with that sale from last month? We got it as a comp. Oh, and you'll learn in a minute why this is crazy and shocking. That listing agent gave me the scoop. This house that sold around the corner that this crazy appraiser used was an estate sale, meaning the kids wanted to go ahead and cash out. Do you think that affects value? Yes. Different from when it's an owner occupant. And they sold it to their friend and gave their buddy a discount. And this appraiser didn't know any of that because he didn't bother to check and see why this was suspiciously lower sale price than anything else should have been at that size. That house, this house with the kid and the estate thing, it was at least 200 or 300 feet larger and significantly less sale price. And I asked to appeal the appraisal, and the first step was to ask the appraiser. The system asked the appraiser, are you sure about this? You want to revisit it? And he said, no, I'm sure. And that was it. So my seller had to either agree to come down on their price by $11,000 or let the deal go. And in the interest of time, because they had another house in their sights, they went ahead and took it. Yeah, there can be bad appraisers. The next step is to determine the highest and best use, confirm that this thing is being put to its highest and best use. And then after that, determine how much of the value is in the land. Because think about this, there could be two exactly same houses, same floor plan, same size, but one is on a half an acre, another is on 2 acres. And you have to allow for that when you're making your adjustments. One is going to sell for more because it has more land, but all the house differences, there aren't really none, right? So knowing how much value comes with the land is important to differentiate. There are 3 approaches to determining value, which we're going to learn next. An appraiser uses, for your purposes, let's say all 3 of those approaches to valuation. And then one of those types of valuation is for good old owner occupied, single family, condo, townhouse kind of properties. One of those, it's called the sales comparison method. That's how we determine what something's worth. We compare it to what similar ones have sold for. And if you just didn't know any better and I said, go tell me what this is worth, and you went on your own and did it, you'd probably use Zillow's estimate. You'd probably maybe look at some tax records because you don't have access to MLS. And all of that would be reasonable. You would compare it. If I said, go buy a car, go shop for a car, what do? You go see what that kind of car costs. The different thing about cars versus houses, though, is you can go to Tennessee and get a better deal on a car, and it can come here. You can't go to Tennessee and get a better deal on a house and bring it here. So that instability, right, that fixed to the land thing is a big difference. So the valuation of vehicles versus cars isn't quite 100% helpful, but you shop, you see, well, oh, this is the one with the advanced package, the better package, the chrome package, or the blacked out package, or the better stereo, right? Same thing. In that regard, it's same as houses. So that's the sales comparison method, comparing what others have sold for. Another one is called the cost approach. Another one is called the income approach. That one is for income property. What an investor wants to know. An investor's not as worried about how the house looks as they are how much rent could it bring? How much profit can I make off of it? I don't really care if it's pretty or ugly. If it's an ugly old house near UNC Charlotte, and I know that I'm never going to have a problem finding a renter because of students, it might be a great investment property. They're not worried about aesthetics. But if they want to buy it to live in it, now the looks might matter more. They might, not only is it ugly, but it's also near all those students. Same reason that they want to buy it as an investment is the reason they may not want to buy it as an owner-occupied house. So out of those 3 methods, the cost approach, as we'll see in a moment, that's different. It's not for owner-occupied houses, and it's not for income property. It is for unique properties that don't sell very often, that are like government buildings, post offices, schools, things like that, that have no automatic database of similar sales that happened recently and also are not investment. So it's sort of the extra. Here's something else that could pop up. Out of those 3, the next question for that appraiser to answer is, what is this one? What is the subject property? Is it an investment property? Then whatever valuation they got using the investment approach, or the income approach, they're going to give more weight to that valuation because it more closely fits the type of property that we're talking about, right? All of it will make more sense as we dig into those things. So depending on reconciling those values, they will pick the one that's the best match. They will report that value and say, here's what I think it's worth. Here's my estimate of market value. And that's what they report on the appraisal. Let's go ahead and report a break and come back in 10 minutes.
This is gonna kill me, but I won't let it. And I try to give them hell, but they don't get it. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, oh,
Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. 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 All right, let's go.
don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Don't lose sight, baby, don't
We're not gonna lose sight.
baby, don't lose sight.
Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Are you kidding me?
Oh, the big letdown. Don't you want to hear the rest of that? Did you hear it? Could you hear that song? Tell me no? Okay, I'll fix it. There was a song playing just now. It was lovely. I'm going to somehow figure out how to play that for you later. All the teases today. Sorry. Let me share something with you. This is a version of what we just looked at, but it's got a few more pictures in it that I want to share with you. Back when I was first starting to teach, the requirement was we had to prepare and teach a 50-minute lesson in front of actual students. So Margie and John let me do that back in 2018, and I prepared this slide deck for this topic. And I put some extra stuff in it, put a little extra sizzle on it. Forgive the old logo. I was just trying to figure out how to update that, but I couldn't get it pulled off. So let me go through a couple of the differences to show off some of this stuff that I think will help get those points across. Who can do what? Various things. Appraisers do appraisals. Provisional and non-provisional brokers do CMAs and BPOs. Forces and factors affecting value. Basic economic principles of value include some stuff. There's those three approaches. That's one of the things I wanted to show you. It's the sales comparison method, it's the cost approach, and it's the income approach. Those are the three various types of valuation methods an appraiser is going to use to determine valuation. Here's what we already know. We talked about these things. Some valuation terms. Appraisal is done by an appraiser. CMA, BPO is done by brokers. Here's something important too. Appraisers give a market value as an exact number. Brokers give it as a probable sales price in a range. And here's the comparable sales method. Looks like this. Sorry. One more time. A lot of animations. I got a little carried away. The subject property is the one we're trying to figure the value of. It's the one in question. Comparing it to typically 3 comparable sales is what is wanted. It's what the lender wants the appraiser to do. The appraiser is going to pick 3. Sometimes they'll pick more. If it's harder to figure out what the value is with just 3, the lender might go back and say, hey, appraiser, could you put one more comp into the mix, help us understand the market a little better? And those are the ones that we're adjusting. Those are the ones that we know the for sure sale price of. We don't know the sold price of the subject yet because it hasn't sold yet. So the only thing we can add or subtract adjusted values to for the various differences is the sale prices of these comps. Here's what the top of an appraisal report looks like. You can see it like the third line down. Opinion. It's an appraiser's opinion, right? Not it looks like a spreadsheet. It's very fancy looking, but it's more of an art, not a science. It's for licensed appraisers only. There is an expiration date. It's good for the date it was printed off, although we still use it for the whole transaction. And the appraisal board sets the minimum standards of practice. I think you've got this by now. And then me show you this. Here's that graphic I wanted to share with you. The farm on the right, the development on the left. Depending on what that farm is growing, it may not be used to its highest and best use. It might be worth more if the developer gets to buy it and put more houses on it. Not that they should. I'm just saying, what is the highest and best use? Maybe this thing on the left, not the thing on the right. Another highest and best use, I think this is in Toronto. Right downtown amongst all these tall buildings is a pink house. Is that house, the land on which it sits, being put to its highest and best use? Maybe. Depends on how much the income is that they make from that little pink house. The people are paying to come see it. But what are some other things they could use that block for? If they tore down that house, what are some things that might be smart to put in its place that might be the highest and best use? Yes, Twee, you absolutely can report the appraiser to the board. That sounds like a personal experience-based question. But yeah. Yeah, restaurant, that might be good. What else could that dirt be used for instead of a pink house? I thought off the top of my head first when I saw it, other office buildings, but somebody said something in a class that was even a better answer than that. How about parking deck? That might be pretty expensive, right? It might be a lot of value there to put in a parking deck because it's in demand. Because if you look at the zoomed out view, I don't have that on here, but if you look at the zoomed out view of this same thing, it's just skyscrapers all around it. It's just nestled in its own little spot. For whatever reason, I should probably look up the actual history and see why it's there. Here's that principle of substitution. Two houses, pretty much the same thing. One is asking less than the other. It's going to sell quicker. Probably going to sell faster. One that's asking $215 sold quicker than the one for $220. Supply and demand, we're dealing with that right now. The more there are to pick from, the lower the price. And then here's our conformity example. Here's another example of conformity. You've got this guy on the left and he wants to sell his house, but the people on the right, it's like friends and family there all the time. It might be hard for this guy on the left to sell his house because people don't want to live next to a parking lot in the driveway, perhaps. And if there are 3 other houses in the neighborhood that don't have this neighbor, they might sell first and for more. They are more in conformity than what's going on right here, right? Another one is this guy. Oh boy. You know, if you live there, not so bad, but if you live across the street from there and that's what you see when you walk out the door every day, that might be great if you're a Broncos fan or if some other reason you're all about that. This one's my favorite. I kind of like it. I don't want to be the neighbor, but I wouldn't mind having a shirt that looked like that. Maybe I'll find one and I'll wear it next week. And then what about this one? We've got a neighbor conflict. Oh boy, I painted my fence, Bob. You kept telling me. If now the neighbor across the street wants to sell their house and this is what the people coming to look and possibly buy it are seeing, number one, it's ugly. Number two, do I want this neighbor? Right? So let's conform. Let's paint it or get rid of the message and put a nice coat of stain on it, pressure wash it or something so that it's conforming, right? And then my favorite one, it really got to a whole new level here. The neighbors are getting creative at this point. Here's the principle of anticipation. You see one of those signs pop up in an area that might not be quite there yet, but here's what's coming. Oh, a Starbucks is coming. Oh, all these places are coming. Therefore, investors who are looking for opportunity might start buying up these properties, right? They buy up these old fixer-uppers from sellers that are tired of it. They don't want to wait any longer. Maybe it's an owner who doesn't have time to wait any longer. My dad worked as a diesel mechanic, big heavy equipment and trucks off of Rocky River Road on 8 acres. His parents owned it. He lived there. He worked there for 50 years. And it was a mile from 485 where it was going to be coming through and eventually did. when we sold it, it was because his dad had just died, left behind Alzheimer's mom, bless her heart. My dad was just diagnosed with cancer. It was just a sad time. We didn't have time to wait. We needed money now to pay for her care, to pay for his lack of insurance because he was self-employed. Therefore, we had to sell it then. And all the old timer buddies said, "What are you doing? You can't sell that now. In the next 5 years, there's going to be that interchange." And we knew that, but what can we do? We need money today, right? That principle of anticipation, the guy we sold it to did well. He ended up actually choosing to live there. He built a nice, pretty house in the middle of the pasture, the middle of the 8 acres, and it got a boost of valuation back when 485 did come through. And that's what that looks like. Here's contribution. Some amenities don't contribute value, like this guy. And then here's the example of competition. McDonald's is never lonely. There's always others nearby. Profits attract competition. You see profits being made, you start a similar business, maybe a gas station nearby, right? Street corners have 2 or 3 options all around. How many similar properties are on the market? It can affect the valuation. We saw some of these graphics already. No condition remains the same. So out of these, which one is the most important? Short-term memory kicking in. Which one is the most important out of the list of principles of value? You got it. Highest and best use. And here's that appraisal process that we kind of saw the outline of. Getting the specific data, income and expenses if it's an investment property, sales prices if it's a comparison method, the general data about the nation, the region, the city, the neighborhood. You know, this seller's market is pretty much nationwide. It's more intent in some areas than others, but an appraiser knows this. Then they're going to see, how does it affect this neighborhood for this house? Defining the problem. What type of method do I need to put more attention on? The income method because it's an investment, or no, owner-occupied use. Therefore, let's look at the sales comparison method more closely and give this property its value based more on that one of the 3. Determining the scope of the work, collecting the data. Part of the collection of and analysis of the data when it's an income method, because it's an investment property, is not even going to be looking at the comps, but looking at the financial statements. They're going to want to see from the current owner, let me see your profit and loss, let me see your rental income, your leases, need to see that data. And maybe it's been a while since they've raised the rents. That new buyer is going to like that because it's time. They can be the new owner and immediately or pretty quickly raise rents and improve their bottom line right off the bat. Highest and best use, we talked about that already. And we talked about the rest. There we go. So let's see. Okay, that sales comparison method of the 3, the sales comparison is for single family type properties and land. If you need to figure out the value of land, you're going to use the sales comparison approach where you compare similar sold properties. If you're going to figure out the value of single family, same thing. If you have a church, school, public building, if that's what you're trying to sell, trying to figure the value of, that's going to use the cost approach. Because basically the cost approach is saying, how much would it cost to build this new? And now let's take off some value because of depreciation, because it's not new. Therefore, let's sort of back into what it's worth based on the new cost and then take off for the fact that it's 20 years old. Income approach is for income property. That one's easy to remember. And then appraiser will use them all 3 if possible, and then pick the one that closely matches the type of property they're dealing with. If it's an owner-occupant house in a neighborhood that's not in investment income kind of a property, then it's going to be more likely to be worth what the appraiser determined using the similarly sold properties. If it's an investment property, we're not so worried about the similar ones that have sold. We're worried about the bottom line, the financial statements. What do things rent for here?
Are the appraisers for commercial real estate and income producing properties different than
Residential.
residential?
They are. In fact, on my property, when I had to get permission from my lender to sell the 1 acre, they sent an appraiser out for $500, and he walked through and realized, he said, "Oh wait, this is for land, like a 1 acre off your side. I don't really need to know what the house looks like. This is not the kind of appraiser you need. You need a commercial appraisal because the land is part of it. Guess how much that cost? Not 500. How about 2,000? I was going to have to pay 2,000 to get a commercial appraiser out there. That's the point at which I realized, you know what? Forget all this. Let me just drop back and punt. Let me just use everything I'm going to make on this sale and pay off the loan. And then I'm done. My buyer won't keep threatening to sue me for specific performance, and we'll be finished. So yeah, big difference between commercial and residential appraisals. Appraiser should not do this. This is a testable, very testable thing. An appraiser should never take the average of those 3 methods. They figure out, let's just say back here, that using the sales comparison approach, they determine it's worth $200,000. Using the cost approach, they determine it's worth $230,000. And using the income approach, it's worth $220,000. They should not average those 3. What they should do is put more weight on the one that's more applicable to the actual property itself. Oh, this is an investment property, then it's worth closer to the 220 than the 200. Oh no, it's not investment, it's owner occupied, then it's going to be worth closer to the 200 than the 220 or the 230, right? By the way, the cost approach tends to result in a higher estimate of value than the others because, again, you're starting from what it would be to build new. Then you're depreciating, you're adding, you're factoring out, subtracting out for depreciation. The one that best fits. How do we pick comps? That's the source of much dispute. When an appraisal is disputed, the first question everybody asks is, what comps did they use? They want to look and see, did you even do a decent job picking comparables? And what do we want? What are we looking for? If you had to, let me take that off. If you didn't see that, tell me, what would you pick in terms of similarity? What types of traits, characteristics, amenities between houses would you be looking for that would be the most important? If you're picking a comparable to see what it sold for and compare to a subject, what types of similarity do there need to be? Square footage is a great one. Good one, Shane. Sure. The closer in size it already is, the more accurate the valuation is going to be. If you don't have to adjust because of size any more than possible, you're going to have a better quality valuation. Age is a good one. That kind of also hand in hand with condition. But then you're getting into something called effective age. Effective age is, yeah, it's 50 years old, but they just redid everything last year. So its chronological age is 50, but its effective age is 1, right? It's practically a new house. Amenities, sure thing. Ideally, let's make sure it has similar amenities as each other, the comps versus, in other words, if a comp comes from a neighborhood that has a swim and tennis facility and a pool, yeah, swim is pool, the subject is not, then yeah, an appraiser might make an adjustment for the difference because typically neighborhoods with pools and tennis courts facilities are worth more. They would allow for that. What about in terms of time? When did it sell? It needs to have sold pretty recently. An appraiser wants to pick something that sold recently. I had a first-time buyer, and she was already nervous. In fact, she was our second-time buyer. I helped her buy one, sold it, she bought a townhouse first. And this time it was a single-family house. Her dad called her the day after she went under contract, and he said, I'm seeing that this isn't worth the $196 that you said you were paying for this. You're paying $1,000 over asking price, and gosh. And she called me in a panic. She said, my dad is chiming in, and he's saying this, and I'm like, it's okay. I'm glad he's looking out for you. What comps is he looking at? Send them to me. 1 year old, 2 years old, from Zillow. Okay. Online valuators have no person that actually went through and looked at it and compared apples to apples. They are using probably bad data because it's coming from the tax record, which is probably wrong square footage. Also, it was a year ago. No appraiser is going to use a year old or certainly not a 2-year-old comp, especially in a market that was 5 years ago when the market was starting to really take off. In fact, within the next 2 weeks, another one down the street, almost exactly alike, went for 205. Dad felt a lot better then. He saw, oh, we're on this upswing. And everybody's always worried as you're going up, are you buying at the top of the market yet? If you buy at what the top of the market is today, you're not necessarily buying at the top of the market because it's keeping on going. The appreciation keeps on appreciating, right? That's the big magic crystal ball part of this. Are you buying at the top? I don't know. But then maybe it's April of this past year, this past April. Yeah, you were buying sort of at the top, maybe a little bit, and now it's going to start going down, maybe shifting a little. I think over the next year, we're going to start seeing more of a leveling out. I'm not seeing it's going to start heading back down the same angle downward, but it's not going to keep going the same angle upward, right? So picking comps, when did they sell, is hugely important. Also, how close geographically. You don't want to pick a comp in South Park for a house in North Charlotte. You don't want to pick a Lake Norman comp for a Concord subject property, right? It's just logical. They need to be similar in age, location, design, size, physical characteristics. Another one is 1-story versus 2-story. An appraiser's not going to compare a 1-story subject property to a bunch of 2-story comparables for a couple of reasons. Any ideas why? Why would that be a problem to compare a 1 level with a 2 level? How about this? Let's see if this will. Okay, good. There we are. A 1-story house, if you're looking from a bird's eye view downward at the footprint, here's the lot. All right, there's the lot. Here's another house lot. Okay, that 1-story house has a footprint that looks like that. It's 1,000 square feet, 1 level. 1,000 square foot 2-story house could be like that in relation. It's also 1,000 feet because on the side view, it looks like this. And the roof can be half the size as on the 1-story house, right? The roof has to be much bigger on this guy because it's spread out more, much more roof cost. This guy can get away with a 500 square foot's worth of roof because you're stacking 500 feet on the upstairs, 500 on the downstairs. So costs, building costs. Also, the footprint of the lot. 2 different lots. You have way more lot left over on the 2-story than you do on the 1-story. And what about those setback lines we learned about? You may not even be able to build the single story because it hits the setback line. So you need to buy a larger lot to even put the single story on. So a lot of major differences there. So an appraiser's not going to compare a single story with a 2-story. They're going to try to compare similar styles of house. And even a tri-level that I live in, where you go in the main level and you immediately either have to go upstairs to get to bedrooms or downstairs to get to the other rooms. That is not going to have as much value as either a single or a 2-story because it's sort of an obsolete floor plan. You kind of have to live on the stairs in these things. It's good for staying in shape for some people who don't snack as much as others. No fingers being pointed. But you'd want to compare a tri-level with other tri-levels if you can. If you can't find them, then I'd probably compare a tri-level to a 2-story and then allow for it. Make an adjustment. If I'm a broker trying to figure out and guess what it should probably sell for, I'm probably going to make an allowance and explain to that seller, look, the point is, the basics here is Buyers tend to seem to buy more two stories and 1 stories than tri-levels. Therefore, we probably can't expect to get as much for yours as if it were a 2 or a 1. Oh, there it is. So picking comps is huge. Another one is this. It needs to have been sold in similar market conditions. And we ran into this a lot in 2008. We had a listing opportunity and come to find out it was a distress sale. It was a pre-foreclosure, short sale, something like that. That seller was a little extra motivated to sell. You compare a seller who's behind in their mortgage to a seller who doesn't really even care if they sell or not because they're current. The one who's behind is going to take less money to get the problem solved and get it over with. So don't use distress sale comps to compare to a non-distress sale subject. The appraiser is going to look for that. Generally 3 to 4 are sufficient and allowable or okay. Where do we find comps? Best resource, probably the most accurate, the MLS. You can also find them in the tax records, but you're going to have to dig harder, dig deeper. Look, it's going to be more of a pain, and you have that less accuracy issue to deal with. They can lack details. They can be flawed, incorrect square footage. So the best comparables you can pick from are things that sold recently. Also things that are close geographically and similar type and similar size. The closer all of these things can be from the beginning and not have to make adjustments for, the more accurate of an idea of value you'll get. So pick close similar ones if at all possible. Sometimes a broker, I'm not going to say an appraiser because they don't care. They're just there to do the job as best they can. But a broker has an ulterior motive. They want to win the seller over, get the listing first, hopefully not at the expense of their ethics. Because some brokers, remember from the comments section, what was it called? I just blanked. What's the opposite of negligent? It's misrepresentation and omission and negligent and willful misrepresentation they could be guilty of if they put a price on the property, advise a seller of value or probable sale price just to get the listing, but not based on any real data. That could be something that gets you in trouble with the commission, an overpriced listing. I can think of a certain company, I could name it, I won't, who, if I see that it's their listing, I'm going to assume it's probably overpriced because they tend to do that. That's just my own little personal private information just for me. I can't share with anybody because I can't talk trash about other companies. And I have no proof, except I'm like, I don't think that's worth that. Now this kind of market, okay, everybody kind of gets away with it now because you just throw it at the wall and see what sticks a little bit. But in a normal market, they historically, in my opinion, have always overshot. Why? Because they just want to tell the seller what they want to hear to get their side in the yard and then work on them and try to get the price down from there. I don't like the ethics of that, right? And I don't like the potential disciplinary action of that either, right? If you go too far, get too carried away with that sort of behavior, you could definitely get in trouble. So after picking something reasonably close geographically and in terms of when sold, single versus 2, similar size, now you're going to think, okay, I've got still plenty comps to pick from. I've got like 8 of them that are all close in all those areas. Now, which one has the updated kitchen like the subject property does? Which one has hardwood floors versus linoleum? Which one has granite versus formica counters? Which one needs work versus not? This one doesn't. Those comps, got 3 of them that have sold recently, but they all needed work. Well, that's also going to tell me, okay, wait a minute. Then this subject is probably worth more than what those sold for. And then there's a couple that don't need work that look great. This comp, how does it fit? How much work do they have versus this? This is when I'll bring with me to the listing appointment the pictures from the MLS. I just don't really give opinion on where theirs falls in the scale. I let them figure it out on their own, so I'm not the bad guy. And I'll say, well, here's the one that sold down the street, and let's look at these pictures. Oh, and they're gonna be like, oh, they got new paint. We still have every room different. Some houses, you stand in one part of the house and you see 5 different colors because you can see that room is purple, that one's green, that one's orange. Not the greatest for getting a buyer to feel warm and fuzzy and want to envision themselves living there, unless they're a rainbow buyer who just loves that color. Hard to find 2 owners in a row that like the same decorating style. That's why wallpaper kind of took a hike there for a while. Apparently it's coming back, but still it's hard to find 2 matching preferences. So the safe play is to do the old boring realtor beige is what we used to call it. Now we call it realtor gray because gray has replaced beige until recently. Now beige is coming back and we call it grayish. Oh boy, what kind of naming processes are we having? Have you noticed color swatches? Go pick some color swatches from Lowe's next time. And they're calling gray beige and vice versa because they're just going off of the latest trends. Who knows who this guy is? Who is this?
The
Oh, yeah,
Heisman.
you got it. That's the Heisman Trophy. And the reason I show you that is because we have to use arm's length transactions only. A transaction where there's no conflict of interest. Remember that comparable that I was upset about on my listing that caused my listing to end up appraising for $11,000 low because they used a comparable around the corner because it was an estate sale. And then meaning the kids were selling it and then they were selling it to their friend. Do you think the kids probably sold to their friend cheaper than they would have sold to a stranger? Or if you find out a comparable was a parent to a child or vice versa, sometimes that makes it even worse. But normally, you're going to have friend to friend, family to family. It's not as accurate of a sale comp because there's a conflict of interest. Somebody wanted to give someone else a deal. It's better to have arm's length transactions. Stranger to stranger who's not interested in giving that stranger a great deal because they love them, right? Making those adjustments, we're looking for comps that are as close as they already can be, but nothing is going to be exact. There's going to need to be some adjustments. And that brings up this point of, I got real creative with the logo there. Apparently my master slide is conflicting, but anyway, we'll get that sorted. Superior comps versus inferior. If it's superior, it means it has more things, better things than the subject property. And we need to make adjustments because of that. You need to either add or subtract. If it's superior, we're going to subtract from what the comp sold for. So it looks like this. First of all, we can't add or subtract from the subject because it's a question mark as to what it's worth. So you can't add or subtract from a question mark, right? So you never adjust the subject. Write this one down. Never adjust the subject, always adjust the comparable. Quite likely you'll see that as a question. If it's a case where something like sold last year and now they want to sell it again, and you have a pretty recent sold price for this subject property, that's when it could be confusing and you might be tempted to do that math on the subject. But again, you never adjust the subject. You don't know what it's worth today. So you only adjust the comparable. You only do the addition and subtraction based on the various differences from what those comps sold for. You're going to add 8,000 because the comp doesn't have a garage, but the subject does. Or comp 2, you're going to subtract 15,000 because comp 2 is that much larger than the subject. If comp 2 is larger than the subject, right, here's the hands again. Where's the frame? Comp versus subject. Comp is larger, superior than the subject. Therefore, we need to take away dollars from it to bring it down to the level of the subject. So we're going to subtract from the price of the comp. Comp 3, let's say it has a 2 bathrooms and the subject has 3. So this time the comparable is inferior. We need to add to it, add dollars to what they sold it for to bring it up to the level of the subject. If that comp had 3 baths instead of 2, because the subject has 3 baths, how much would it have sold for? Instead of 158.3, maybe it would have sold for 163.3, right? There are 2 kinds of comparables that cannot be used. Remember, the MLS has all kinds of data. It's got sold data, it's got active things that are currently available, it's got under contract listings, things that are under contract. We don't know what they sold for yet, because we're not allowed to report those things, because if it fell apart, fell through, we would have told the whole world what the seller had been willing to take. Therefore, under contract listings do not reveal their sale prices until they become closed. Out of those 3 types, which 2 can we not use in determining value? Actives, under contracts, and solds. The only one we can use is solds, right? Because we don't know what an active is going to sell for. We just know, remember what I call the list price? I call it the wish price, right? They're just hoping. And we also don't know what the under contract actually sold for, because it hasn't sold yet. It hasn't closed yet. We won't know until these things sell and close. Therefore, by the way, an appraiser will put them in the appraisal report just as a point of reference, but they will make their adjustments based on the sold comps only. I need to put a mask on this microphone so I don't get y'all sick. I'm feeling a little scratchy in the throat today. The object is to make that comparable property more like the subject property in dollar amounts. So the most accurate you can start out with, as similar to the subject you start out with as possible, is going to be more accurate. Real Estate Commission holds us accountable for how well we do CMAs. And if we don't do it right, in other words, if we buy the listing, that's disciplinary. And that might scare some of you. You might be thinking, when are we going to learn how to do that? Well, not here. We're going to talk a little bit about the principle of sales comparison approach in a moment. But the actual real world, what are things worth in this neighborhood versus that is the OJT, on the job training. That is what you'll get from your broker in charge, your trainer, courses you can take. There's a great designation. Remember, Margie has a bunch of alphabet behind her name. I have some too, and I have something called a what is it called? A pricing strategy advisor, I think is what it's called. It's from the Realtor Association. I paid them, it's like $100 maybe 2. And I sat through a course. I don't remember how long it was. It might have been a day or 2. And it went into detail about how to properly value a property. And it will also come from just knowing what things are worth. Once you have access to the MLS, I would suggest, while you're new especially, and even beyond then, just to stay crispy, do market analyses. Do market analyses on properties. Pick a neighborhood that you would love to sell in. Find one that is active, or maybe even better, find one that's an under contract listing. Do a CMA on it. Put it aside. You can set a little alarm, little alert for yourself in the MLS. When it flips to closed, you can tell yourself, it will shoot you an email, and then see how good you were. Once it closes, you'll see what it ended up selling for. See, 3 weeks ago when I did my CMA, I saw that I predicted it would sell for $550 and they got $555 or whatever, right? So practice. In real life, you just have to practice it. There's no magical list that a fireplace is worth $3,000. It depends on where it is. Where is the house? A vocabulary word you need to know is correlation. Basically, it's an equal sign, right? Once the adjustments are made, using them to determine that final probable sales price is this process of correlation. Making the adjustments, getting adjusted sale prices, and then using those to determine what the probable sale price is going to be. So we'll we'll come back to this. Let me talk about the principles of value. The sales comparison method. Well, no, we'll just go ahead. We'll go with the process here. The subject property has 2 bedrooms. Comparable property has 3 bedrooms. So comparable property is superior in terms of bedrooms. The estimated value of a bedroom is $2,500. According to the sales comparison method, the appraiser should do what? How would they make the adjustment for the bedroom difference? Would they add or subtract 2,500? Okay, bring out your hands while you're sitting there in your PSI exam or in your class final. Do this. It's okay. If that's what it takes. Subject property has 2 bedrooms. Comparable has more. It's superior. It's got 3. What do we need to do? Subtract to bring it down to the subject. So we're going to be subtracting, and then the other question is, what do we subtract from, the subject or the comp? And you guys, some of you are getting it. We're going to subtract the 2,500 from the comparable. We can't subtract it from the subject because we don't know what the subject sold for. That's what we're trying to figure out, what it will sell for. Its market value. So it's C. Deduct 2,500 from the value of the comparable. It might have been a little more clear if I'd have written the question and included what the comparable sold for. If you read that whole thing and it also said the comparable sold for $150,000, now what do you do? It might have been, oh yeah, okay, comparable sold for a thing. We need to subtract 2,500 from the 150 to bring it down to what it would have sold for if it had 2 instead of 3 bedrooms, right? What about this one? Subject property has a 2-car garage. A comparable down the street sold for $245,000 last month. It is superior to the subject. It has 3-car garage. Everything else the same. The broker figures the value of a 1-car garage adjustment to be $5,000 for this neighborhood. What is the probable sale price of the subject property? Okay, what do we have here? We've got a subject. I'm going to write this and then I'm going to share with you what I'm writing. And we have a comp. Subject has a 2-car garage. Comparable has a 3-car garage. Comparable sold for $245,000 last month. And the value of a garage is $5,000. By the way, the questions people had in Notion, I did make a video. I just need to publish it, so I'll post that for you when we're done today. Here's what I do. I just write the columns, and I've got a subject with a 2-car and a comparable with the 3-car garage. The comparable sold for $245,000. We don't know what the subject sold for. That's what we're trying to do now. Predict it. What are we going to do to this $245,000? Are we going to add or subtract? We know how much a garage is worth. 1 garage worth of difference for adjustment purposes is $5,000. But what do we do? Subtract or add it to the price the comparable sold for? We need to get it down. We need to turn 3 into 2. We need to subtract, don't we? So we are going to subtract 5,000, Darnell. Good job. To get $240,000. So if everything else is the same, the comparable would have sold with a 2-car garage for $240,000, not $245,000. Not bad. It's when there's a laundry list and it's not just the garage, but also a fireplace and a bathroom and a square footage. And that's what some of those problems in the back of the chapter bring up that I think get a little confusing. Let's look at this one. Subject property has 2.5 bathrooms. A house in the same neighborhood sold for $175,000 last week and is inferior to the subject because it has 2 bathrooms. Everything else is the same. Broker says a full bath, based on their research, is a $3,000 adjustment. Half bath is a $1,500 adjustment. By the way, half bath is not necessarily exactly half the value of a full. In fact, if I rewrote this question, which I need to do actually, I'd probably say 1,800 or 2,000. It's not going to be a direct half kind of equivalent sort of thing. So the subject has 2.5 baths. The comparable has 2. Now the comparable is inferior. It's sold for 175,000. All right. So here is our columns. Write it all out there. Now what do we need to do? We need to get this comparable and add a half bath to it. So we need to add. We need to, because it is currently inferior, we need to make it equal. So we're going to add, but which number? We need to add a half bath's worth. We need to add 1,500. So everything else being the same, comparable would have sold if it had 2.5 instead of only 2 baths, would have sold for 176.5. We good? All right. Gonna have to find the cough drops at the break. That is basically the sales comparison method. It couldn't be on the test. You'll see more than one probably. You might see one question that only has 1 or 2 adjustments, but you'll quite likely see 3 or 4 differences that you need to adjust for. And that's what you see in the back of the chapter that somebody mentioned on Notion. Cost approach is that thing for anomaly kind of properties, churches, schools, government buildings. And what we're doing with the cost approach is a lot different. There's not a neighborhood full of old churches to figure out values of, right? You just can't count on that. There's not going to be a recent sale of a church nearby, and you have to list this old church. Therefore, this is probably what you would guess you would need to do. If you didn't know any better and somebody said, tell me what this is worth, you'd probably think, all right, well, it's a school. It's an old abandoned school. How much would it cost to build a building like this school? Maybe if it's a school from, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, it's like really fancy block, stone, and it looks pretty solid on the outside, but you get inside and it's got asbestos tile and it's got, it's really dated and beaten up. So it's really worn out. So you would figure out how much would it cost to build a building just like this today? And then how bad is it that we need to depreciate for the fact that it's in such disrepair? So it's based on this principle of substitution. How much would it cost to get something equally desirable and substitute? 5 steps to the cost approach. We estimate the land first because we never depreciate land. Land does not depreciate. It's not going to depreciate because it needs a paint job, in other words. So first step when using the cost approach is to figure out how much those 30 acres are worth, or 5 or 10 or 1 or however many. Take the land out. What do you do to figure out what the land is worth? Don't forget that part. You use the sales comparison method to figure out what the land is worth so that you can add that dollar amount that you figured out the land is worth back in at the end of this. So figure out the land using the CMA method. Next would be estimate the current cost of building it and its improvements. And then figure out how bad are they? How in disrepair are they? Because of age, because of things like functional obsolescence. What is a depreciation amount to subtract from how much this costs to build new? We're depreciating. We're factoring in the depreciation. We're going to subtract that depreciation from the cost to build it new. Then we're going to add the amount we said the land was worth back to that number to end up with a total property value. Because all we have to go on is what something would cost to build. When it comes to the cost approach, there's a couple of terms you need to know. The reproduction cost versus the replacement cost. This is the difference between going to Lowe's for a front door and having a front door made to be period specific because it's a historic property, for instance. So, and a reproduction cost is how much would it cost to make an exact replica at today's prices? If your front door falls apart on your historic house in downtown Charlotte or downtown Concord, you can't just go to Lowe's and buy a $300 steel door to put on the front. You're going to have to get a historically accurate front door custom made. Which one is worth more? Which one's going to cost you more? That ain't going to be $300. It might be $3,000, right? So reproduction cost is going to be more because you're making an exact replica. Replacement cost is all about function. It's a door. We need a door. The more commonly used thing, using modern materials and methods, the assembly line process, that steel door is stamped out of a piece of steel. Robots do it. So therefore they can charge $300 instead of $3,000. The reproduction door is handmade, custom made by somebody using maybe tools that were period specific too, for that matter. So knowing that reproduction cost is different than replacement cost. This is an example out of an old textbook, and I think you can see that okay. What we're doing here is the cost approach. And step one here, top, the land size was 60 by 135 feet, and they just so happened to be valuing it based on front footage because don't forget, cost approach is about like churches, schools, government buildings. We're talking commercial part of the industry, commercial real estate, and in commercial, front footage is usually more important. So they're using front feet to come up with a land value of $27,000. 60 front feet times $450 per front foot, $27,000. They're also giving a value for all the improvements to the lot, like driveway, landscaping, stuff like that. They end up with a land valuation of $35,000. They're taking that away. They're setting that to the side. Now let's look at the building. How much would it cost to build this new? Well, it's a 1,500 foot building. At a $65 per square foot construction cost, it would cost $97,500 to build this building new. Now we need to take out for depreciation because it is not new. This is an old 30-year-old government building, old post office maybe. What types of depreciation are we dealing with? Well, some types are called curable. They can be fixed, like it needs a paint job. Deferred maintenance kind of thing. In this case, they're allowing for a $4,000 paint job. Then there's some stuff called an incurable depreciation, structural deterioration, things that you can't even fix. It's so bad it can't even be fixed. They're allowing an estimated value of $97.50 for that. Functional obsolescence you can't do much about, but how much does that factor into the depreciation? The fact that it's got 5 rooms but only 1 bathroom, or it's got not any room in the attic space for ductwork to be run and it has no AC. It'd be almost impossible to get a modern heating and air system run through it without putting major sized ducts in all the rooms. Some sort of functional obsolescence they're allowing $2,000 for. All of that depreciation subtracted from the cost to build it new ends up with a depreciated value of the building of $81,750. But that's just a building floating in midair. We need to add the land value back in of $35,000. Now the cost approach method has determined this is worth $116,750. How much is a break worth to you? I'll give it to you for free. I'll see you in 10 minutes.
This is
Welcome back. Just in time. Dogs put away. Hot drink made. I even found cough drops. New ones. Well, they were new whenever I bought them once upon a time. Maybe they'll be that cool, chewy kind of way that cough drops get when they're a year old. See what happens. Who likes old cough drops? Anybody? Just me? Oh, good. Not just me. So here it is. Circles made some, well, squares or, okay, shapes. Rectangles. Here's our land we're setting aside. We're figuring out the value of the land using the sales comparison method. Then the cost to build new, then the depreciation, then doing all the math to get that estimate of value. Building cost is estimated in a couple of different ways. One way could be cost per square foot. Appraisers look at this. It's funny when you talk to a builder because they get right down to the point. Many times a builder will say, yeah, cost to build is about $120 a square foot. Okay, what are you putting it on? Are you building it in midair? What kind of lot situation are we talking about? Is this on 10 acres in the woods? Is this in a neighborhood? You know, that is part of it to consider. Just a straight up, how many square feet is it times a dollar per square foot number? To be fair, builders probably have in mind a certain lot size when they quote such a thing. So a cost per square foot. The quantity survey method and the unit in place method might be something that contractors use as well. Quantity survey just means we need this many raw materials, this many 2x4s, this much concrete, and this is how much it's going to be. And then we need to also factor in how much will it cost for someone to put it all together, installation cost. That's the quantity survey method. The unit in place method is, instead of looking at the quantity of the raw materials, it's saying it's going to cost this much to build this unit of building component. And we're adding it up in chunks of units. So a contractor will use one of these two. Appraisers tend to use price per square foot. Oh, there it is. Sorry. This depreciation that we need to subtract, it's a loss in value. And there's lots of reasons that there could be a loss in value. It could be because of physical deterioration. Obviously, the older it is, the more the physical deterioration there could be. So the question is, out of the work that is needed, are the repairs even possible? Are they physically possible? And then are they even worth doing? Do you want to put a $20,000 heating and air system in a property that is the little 2-bedroom home that you might be spending $40,000 to buy, right? Hard to imagine spending that to buy something. But point being, how much would it cost to do the work needed? Is it worth putting that work in it? Are you going to put $8,000 rims on a $6,000 used car? That kind of thing. Some people would. So is it curable? Routine maintenance, roof, painting, these sorts of things. Can we do something about it? When you see VIP on these slides, that's pretty important. Curable versus incurable. Incurable would be an example of like foundational repairs, load-bearing wall issues. Oop, I disappeared. Let me change that. Hey, there's me. There it is. Curable versus incurable. Incurable meaning like load-bearing walls. There we go. Foundational stuff. There's another term you need to know called functional obsolescence. Some sort of undesirable design feature or physical feature. Functional obsolescence. We don't do that anymore, sort of a thing. One thing that comes to mind that we used to see in the 70s are sunken living rooms, right? Just 2 steps down into it. It's, it's a look, but you're also kind of ruling out a whole segment of potential buyers who might need mobility assistance. Hard to have a buyer owner who's in a wheelchair if they can't even get to the living room because it's sunken. Looks cool, but it's sort of a functional obsolescence thing, an undesirable physical feature. We don't really see those anymore because for good reason. Is it curable? Is it an outdated fixture? Is it grandma brass? Is it just stuff that doesn't work so well anymore? Faucets that kind of get all sputtery? Yeah, that's easy. We could fix that. Plumbing can fix that. Room conversions. Maybe when it was built, it was on a septic tank and it only perked for a 3-bedroom. But over the years, people used the downstairs office space. They added a closet to it. They maybe punched into the basement a little bit and put in a finished closet. And in the meantime, they no longer even use the septic system. They've tapped onto the city sewer system. Now we can call it a 4-bedroom. We're not limited by the septic system, perk test. We have a city sewer connection. We have a 4th bedroom with a door and a closet, ingress, egress. Therefore, now we can call it a 4 instead of a 3. We just added value. It was curable. Maybe something like walking through a room to get to another room. That is not something we can call a bedroom. If you have to walk through it to get to another room, but maybe there's a way to reroute the traffic pattern in that floor and maybe punch through another wall, create a different door. So now that we can have a separate entrance to that room, don't have to walk through it. Now we can call it a 5-bedroom instead of only 4. Incurable examples would be a lot of bedrooms, but only 1 bath. Is it reasonable? Would a buyer want 1 bath to share amongst everybody living in 5 bedrooms? Or it didn't have air conditioning and it would be too expensive to put in the ductwork. Therefore, is it worth putting in the AC? Economic depreciation would come from something, it's uncontrollable. You're near a nuisance, a noise nuisance, a pollution nuisance. That is economic depreciation. You would allow for that because, oops, there's the poop farm right next door, or the hog farm that's really smelly, or the airport traffic pattern right overhead. Economic depreciation is always incurable, outside of the control of the owner. Can't do anything about it. So what 2 things cannot be depreciated? We do not use depreciation when we're valuing personal residences, and we do not depreciate land. Those 2 things are not depreciated. Okay, good. There's something called the age-life method for determining depreciation. It uses effective age. Remember, effective age is different than actual chronological age because if they've done a lot of work to it, put a new roof on it, new heating and air system, it's essentially 1 or 2 years old, but it's a 50-year-old house. That's effective age. So the age-life method uses the effective age and the economic life. When determining depreciation, they use what's called a straight line method, just a straight line from declining. Economic life declines from 100% down to 1 to 0%, an even rate of depreciation. In other words, it was great for the first 10 years, but then it sharply fell off because it needed a new roof, needed a new heating, and you know how those things kind of pop up all at the same time. Don't need to worry about that. It depreciated really more steeply in the middle than the beginning. Irrelevant. We're going to take a straight line, even rate of depreciation over the life up to this point. Oops. There we go. The effective age is the appraiser. The appraiser will make a note on the report and say, The chronological age was built in 57, but the effective age is more like 80 years old than 40 years old because it's in really bad shape. Maybe it had a string of tenants that really abused it, or something broke, the roof started leaking and they never fixed it, and it just got worse and worse and worse. The appraiser states both chronological, but they'll make a reference that the effective age seems commensurate with the chronological, or it's shorter, or it's newer. They will make a reference to that. So the cost approach is used for these things: government buildings, schools, churches, libraries, fire stations, public hospitals. It is not income producing. Oops, sorry. Goodness. Okay. I'll get my act together. There it is. Not for income producing property. They're not sold often. Therefore, there are no comps to use. Therefore, we have to just go from scratch. Figure out the cost to build, separate the land, depreciate the new construction cost, add the land back in. Now we have used the cost or the appraiser. We as brokers aren't going to use the cost approach. We are going to use the sales comparison method 90% of the time. If it's a unique property like this, by the way, and you're tempted to take it and get into commercial, that's fine. Make sure you have proper guidance. But as far as the valuation, I'd probably just pay for an appraisal. I'm not going to try to use my, especially beginner, limited expertise coming up with what this thing is worth and doing a cost approach. No way. I'm going to consult various sources, shell out the money. This is a commercial property, costs more to market, right? But it pays a lot more. It might be a 6-figure commission to you, but you better have some upfront money available. Sometimes the owner might even kick in and you could just talk them into getting the appraisal done. Sure. But it's a business decision. But I would go on that listing appointment. I'd say, hey, let's figure out what an appraiser thinks it's worth, because that's ultimately whose test this needs to pass anyway, right? So I'll hook you up with a good appraiser.
Would the lender require an appraisal because of how large the loan amount is?
The lender would require it because it's a purchase. Remember, they won't allow it. They would require it to be appraised if they're going to loan money based on it. And odds are somebody's going to use financing to buy a commercial property. Even if they have the cash, leveraging other people's money is probably the way to go. Of all three approaches, the cost approach, sales comparison, and income approach, the cost approach we just learned is going to typically result in the highest valuation of the three, because again, you're basing it on new construction cost. So it's all comes down to how much depreciation did you allow for. Okay, now we're on this one. You could run into this one quite likely, a lot more likely than you'll run into the cost approach in real life, because investment property, investors, they don't care about how pretty it is as much as they care about the numbers on the statements. Therefore, we need to look at a whole different batch of things when it comes to estimating value of investment property. Income capitalization approach, also known as just the income approach. The present worth of future rights to income. Based on the history of what the rents were and what the operating expenses were, how much is this thing worth in the future? That's what an investor wants to know. The income derived from the property will control the value of that property. How much rent can you get? Oh, have you not raised rents in like 5 years? Well, it's prime opportunity to raise the rents. So I'm going to buy this thing, raise the rents, might drive some people away. Don't want to re-up with me, but they will be replaced by people willing to pay the new rent amount, right? A lot less emotion in the investment property side of things, right? More about that money. Determines the value of an income producing property based on net income. And this could be commercial, right? Of course. Residential investment property, but also commercial shopping centers, office buildings, high rises, motels, apartments, 100-unit apartment complex, apartment building. Okay. Buckle your seatbelt. It's going to be okay. I promise. A little bit of math here. You need to know the concept here. There are a couple of nuances, a couple of calculations amongst what we are about to talk about, but it's okay. And if you think about it in terms of selling something on eBay, or maybe a smaller example in your real life, this will make more sense. I like to boil this topic down to its basic level. All we're looking at with this formula, this acronym, which represents a formula, is how much can you make from it? Let's say it's a duplex. You have a duplex. You know what that is? 2 dwellings under one roof, could be a townhouse, could be condo, single story, 2-story. Let's just say it's a duplex, and you rent out each side for $500 each. Here's our duplex. One side, side A, side B. You're renting side A for $500. Let's change it a little bit. Let's say it's one of those duplexes that has a little bit nicer on one side than the other. We can get $600 for side B. Sorry for that ugly B. So how much will you make in a month if this thing is fully rented? Fully occupied, both sides occupied. Your monthly is $1,100. That's easy. But now we want to put it on the market and sell it. That investor wants to know, how much could I stand to make in a year? And that's still easy. $1,100 a month times 12 months. $13,200 a year. Are we done? Is that all the investor cares about? No. The investor cares about some other things. What would you care about? Some things to subtract. We're going to subtract out operating costs. Right? This is a little product of yours. Yeah, upkeep, Shane. Operating costs. Maybe it's a larger thing. Maybe it's a 100-unit apartment complex. And they are all renting for $500. Take it to that level. It's 100 units. Let's make it more realistic. They're all renting for $1,500 a month. Times 100 of them. $1,500 times 100. In a year, if it were totally occupied, you would theoretically make $150,000 gross income. Sorry. Thank you. That's the month. You guys are always good. That's the month times the 12. There we go. 1.8 million. There's our annual. That looks better. Now, what comes with a 100-unit apartment building? That's going to require more operating costs. This is an apartment building. What kinds of operating expenses are we dealing with an apartment building? Utilities, right? Maybe there's an elevator. Got to keep that thing working. Maybe there's the grounds being kept up. Maybe it's the parking lot being kept up. It's paved. Got to keep it working and get those potholes filled. Maybe there's an on-site manager. Yeah, laundry. That's an extra source of income for you. That could be maybe not operating expenses, but an extra source of income. Property management. You're not going to be the one who lives on site. You're the investor. You own it. You don't want to live there. You already have a house. So your on-site person is the one who's managing it. That's the one who's maybe the on-site person is the maintenance person and the property manager is in an office down the street. Yeah, water, sewer, trash, all the stuff, the real world stuff that makes it less fun. Pest control, that's a good one. Operating expenses factor into this thing. So you're not making a 1.8 million. You're making 1.8 million minus whatever it costs to run this business, because it's a business, isn't it? But even before you get to the operating expenses, there's something else important to think about. Are you going to have 100% occupancy all year round in a 100-unit complex? Probably not. And in fact, some would say you don't want it. Some would say 100% occupancy, meaning all 100 units being rented at the same time, probably means you're not asking enough rent. When you do the research and study properties like this, you might find that by raising the rent, you'll drop your occupancy maybe to 95, 96%. But because all of those people who are willing to pay your higher rent are paying higher rent, it's worth more. You're making more. So your sweet spot is probably a little more of a vacancy rate than zero. You kind of want there to be a vacancy rate. And what you will also have in addition to a vacancy rate is a collection fee. You've got to pay to send people to collection. Some people who are going to be occupying won't be paying on time. Got to pay some money to maybe handle getting money, late fees, things like that. Yeah, there it is, evictions, legal stuff. So we've got income, gross income. We've got subtracting out for vacancy and collections, and we've got operating expenses. Those are the three main buckets involved in running this business that is a investment property. So with that in mind, let's look at this again. Given just means GI, gross income. There's our 1.8 million if everything was completely rented. Vacancy means subtracting out for that fact that it's a 96% occupancy instead of 100% occupancy. And then expenses just means subtracting out for utilities and parking lot maintenance and the on-site manager and the taxes and everything else that it takes to run it. When you do that math, that gives you a very desired statistic, something you've all, I'm sure, heard of. Net operating income. You're not so much concerned with what's the gross income. You're more worried about what am I going to be left with after factoring in real life. Kind of reminds me of what makes me laugh. Sometimes real estate agents will advertise, I am a $5 million producer. And I'm thinking, okay, so you sold $5 million in real estate. What did you walk away with? Oh, you have a team of 20. And because of all of that and your operating expenses, you sold $5 million in real estate. You made gross $150,000, but you had to spend $149,000 to make the $150,000. Less impressed. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay, you have a $1.8 million income property, but how much does it cost you to run it? And there's only 2 people living there. You have a 98% vacancy. That would be a disaster, right? By the way, vacancy rate versus occupancy rate, those two added together, right? They're the opposite thing. Vacancy rate means how many people aren't there. Occupancy rate means how many people are there. So a 95% occupancy rate is a 5% vacancy rate, right? Sort of like that whole commission thing. 100% of the full sale price commission, the price versus the agent's portion versus the seller's portion. Okay, so that gives us our net operating income. Gross income is the full amount, 100% occupancy. Vacancy rate is subtracting out the fact that people aren't going to live there. And then also some people who are there aren't going to be paying on time. Operating expenses are indeed those things. Now, important caveat, write this one down. Operating expenses do not include the mortgage. Don't put in the debt service. That's called your monthly payment. If this is a 100-unit apartment complex that you have financed, which it probably is, and it costs you, I have no idea, $5,000 a month to pay the note, to pay the payment, that is not one of the operating expenses. We handle that further down the list in this formula. You'll see it in a moment. The mortgage payment is called debt service. Debt service is not included in the operating expenses. Write it down. Everything else is, though. Management, utilities, keeping reserves, maintenance, repairs, insurance, taxes, all that stuff, but not debt service. Which of the following is not operating expenses? A, property tax. B, maintenance. C, debt service. Or D, utilities. That's how it could show up on the test, some version of that. Debt service, the mortgage payment, not an operating expense. There it is. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing, and I'm thinking you're seeing what I'm seeing. That's easier. Operating expenses do not include debt service. And so after we've done all this subtraction, but not yet to the debt service, we end up with net operating income, NOI, and that is what is left. Net operating income. Net operating income. Why is the debt service not included in the NOI number? Appraisers are going to assume that it's a cash purchase because it's the buyer's business as to how they want to buy it. If they can pay cash and they choose to, fine. It doesn't affect the net operating income as to did you pay cash or did you get financing. You might still want to know what the NOI is and then decide later, am I going to pay cash because I do have it if I want to, or am I going to leverage my money and buy 2 apartment buildings because I only have to put a portion down for each? Now it's a game changer, right? It might be smarter to leverage yourself and buy 2 with loans than it is to buy 1 in cash. None of that is affected by this NOI number. You can still compare different investment properties, NOIs, and not have to worry, but how did that current owner own it? Did they have a loan or not? So it's important to have the NOI not involved with debt service. Helps you to compare and then decide later, okay, let's look at the numbers if I do get financed versus if I don't. But the NOI is not a part of that. Now, who has a savings account? Got your money, a couple of dollars in a savings account. What kind of rate are you getting at your savings account? Like 20%, 30% return on your money? Oh no. How about let's move the decimal point over a couple of spaces.
We wish.
Yeah, it's an embarrassingly low rate of return on that savings account because it's safe. You're just parking it in a place. You don't have to worry about it. With less risk comes less reward, right? So all this next thing is a way to measure your return. If you're in Bitcoin, if you're in regular old stocks, bonds, anything like that, you're looking at a rate of return. The capitalization rate is that for real estate. The cap rate is the rate that helps an investor compare investment property potential or two different investment properties. They look at that to see what the rate of return is on the property. So here's another place where we'll see the term yield. Normally and usually the word yield is going to be pertaining to discount points. But in this case, the investor is the one who is yielding the money, the rate of return. The rate of return an investor expects to get for putting their capital, their down payment into this kind of building. Why? Why put my money in this building to buy it? Because I want a certain cap rate. I want the rate of return. So, what's that look like? It's this. The formula for calculating capitalization rate is to take the net operating income that you get from the financial statement, ask the seller, Let me see your financials. I want to maybe buy your property. Let me see your financials. Let me see what the NOI is. Divide it by the price that you end up paying for it or that you're considering making an offer for. And that gives you the cap rate. There are different ranges of cap rates for different kinds of investment properties. And sometimes in post-licensing classes, I'll have a guest speaker. And I've had this guy out of Georgia. Gosh, what's his last name? It's something kind of simple but fun. Michael, I'll think of it. Anyway, he does office buildings very specifically. By the way, most commercial brokers specialize very specifically. And he does office buildings only. And I said, what's the cap rate you're seeing and you deal with office buildings? And if I recall, I think he said it was 8 or 9. Somewhere 8 to 9% is the cap rate for office buildings that he deals with. So if it's an office building, it's going to be a certain cap rate range. If it's an investment property versus a commercial that's like street frontage, store frontage, strip malls versus like full out malls or anchor stores, all that kind of stuff with all the various kinds of commercial property or income property. It could even just be a duplex apartment building. There's a cap rate that the sales data will reveal. Just like when you do a market analysis with the sales comparison method, you'll see in this neighborhood, garages are worth $8,000. You'll see in this area of town, investment properties like this, office complexes like this, the cap rate tends to be 9%. So that's how they use the cap rate. And just like any math in this course, we can plug this into a T formula or circle formula, and it looks like this. That net operating income is on top. So net operating income, another way to write it, is take the capitalization rate that you get by doing your research of similar properties, multiply it by the market value. Cap rate times market value equals net operating income. Or what we just saw, net operating income divided by sales price equals cap rate. There it is again. NOI divided by, and when we say market value, same thing as sales price. We're just working because we're assuming it's going to sell for this. So by the way, how is this useful? You know the cap rate of this type of property is 9%. You know the net operating income of this exact property that you're thinking about buying is $150,000. That's the NOI because you saw it on the financial statement. Because NOI is a product of the gross income possible minus vacancy minus operating expenses. That's your NOI. So you have those two givens. Take that NOI, divide it by the cap rate that you've learned in your research. That's going to tell you what you should spend on this property. Right? If all of that comes out to $1.3 million, then you probably shouldn't pay more than $1.3 million for this one. And if the NOI is so jacked up because of the poor way they're running this business of this property, such that the value is out of whack with what similar properties have sold for, you're either going to lowball them or you're going to walk away from this deal. It's all an analysis method. It's all a reason for using it is to analyze the property to make sure you're putting your capital, your down payment into something that's going to be worth the risk that you're willing to take on. Note that anytime one of the bottom figures goes up, the other one has to go down. Because if you're multiplying two things together, the higher cap rate goes up, the lower it's going to be worth because the NOI is staying the same. Market value goes down as cap rate goes up, given the same NOI. Here's a way to write it in a linear way. And another little acronym for this particular formula is called IRV, I-R-V, right? This is IRV. IRV means income, NOI income, net operating income, divided by cap rate equals the value, market value, expected sales price. It's a way to see if they're being reasonable in what they're asking. You ask to see the financials so that you get the NOI. You know the cap rate because you've seen similar ones like this type of property in this area. Therefore, you know cap rates are 10% here. and you do that math and you see that they're asking way too much. Then you want to ask why. Is it like super brand new? Is it got like something that nothing else has? Is there a reason for it being more? Maybe it's worth it to you to pay more for it. And then the other question is, let me see that financial statement, that NOI. Are you charging enough rent? Is it an opportunity to raise the rents, which would affect the NOI and improve that for myself, therefore improve everything else? And by analyzing all those numbers, an investor would maybe find an opportunity. So we have our gross income again. We subtract out for vacancy and delinquencies. That gives us what's called the effective gross income. Then we subtract out for operating expenses. There we go. Now we have that NOI number. That's what I call vertical calculation. Now we're going to go horizontal, and we're seeing that NOI divided by the current market value equals cap rate. So another way to write that is NOI divided by cap rate equals market value. So which thing do you know? You know the NOI, and maybe you just want to see what the cap rate is. Okay, you're looking now, instead of examining the property you might want to buy, these numbers on this formula, you are pulling those from something that sold last month. You know the NOI, you got the financials, you know what it sold for because it's a sold comp. You can take the NOI, divide it by the sold price it went for to come up with what the cap rate is. And now you do that on about 10 or 20 of them, and you see the tendencies of cap rates for these kinds of properties. Now you take that knowledge, you apply it to one that's on the market, and you take your NOI and divide it by cap rate to figure out what it's worth, right? You can just investors are going to move those numbers all around. Okay, now we are at the NOI level. Forget about cap rate. We're done with that for now. Now we're going to keep on going down the vertical direction. Now let's see how debt service on this particular investment building project opportunity. Let's see how debt service factors in. Take our NOI, net operating income, subtract out the mortgage payment that you're going to be dealing with. Like, I want to finance 50% of this building. My mortgage payment is going to be, if I were to pay full market price, full asking price, my loan amount would be this, therefore my payment would be this. Subtracting that debt service number from the NOI gives what is called cash flow. I know you know that word. That's how much cash is coming in your pocket when it's all done. We're finished paying out things. We're done paying everything. Now it's the money going in our pocket. Cash flow. NOI minus debt service brings us to cash flow. Right? And that's it. That's this whole formula. But there is one more horizontal that you can, here we go. Cash flow. There's one more horizontal calculation you can see. Just like the NOI is related to cap rate, the cash flow is related to the equity rate of return. In other words, the cap rate is the rate of return without thinking about the debt service, because we haven't factored that in yet, because we're working with the NOI, and NOI does not account for the debt service. But if we do want to now see how using a loan for our leverage would affect our investment, then let's look at the cash flow. If we divide the cash flow by what we originally invested in the property, that shows what our equity rate of return is. Go ahead.
What do you want? What do I subtract again to get the cash flow?
The mortgage payment, also known as debt service. You got to pay $8,000 a month to own this building in your principal and interest payment, your mortgage payment. That's just another word for debt service, is another word for mortgage payment.
And it give me cash flow.
Yep. And that takes you down to what your cash flow on this property is. You got it. You got it. So let's look at it in an example. We've got a potential gross annual income, $60,000. That's at 100% capacity, but that's not real world. Quite unlikely we'll have 100% capacity. Also, we probably don't want that either. We also they have some income from maybe vending machines and whatever payphones are. I'm not familiar with that device. That's $600 more, so a total of $60,600 of gross income. Now let's take out for the fact of reality that there's 4% of those units that are not rented at all. We're not getting rent for 4% of them. Between that and collection losses, we're subtracting $2,424. So the effective gross income is $58,176. I think you can see my cursor, but you can see the number there. Now we have this big long list of operating expenses. Taxes, $9,000, insurance, $1,000, blah, 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 all the way down to management, $3,000. All of those operating expenses add up to $27,300. Let's subtract $27,300 from the effective income of $58,176. So our net operating income is $30,876. But that does not include the debt service. We're not there yet. Okay, let's talk about cap rate. We've done our research. We know that cap rates for properties like this are 10%. That's the cap rate for a property like this. Divide the NOI by the cap rate, and it'll give you a income estimate or valuation of $308,760. With this given cap rate of properties like this and this NOI of this specific property, you probably shouldn't pay more than $308,760 for it. That's the practical application. That's also what the appraiser is going to tell you. Look, based on these numbers, it's worth $308,760. With me? We are not deep diving into this. This is it. You just most importantly need to know the relationship of the given acronym. And you need to know how to turn NOI into cap rate and vice versa. IRV. It may be the one for cash flow, which is pretty much the same thing, except you're using a number that you have subtracted debt service from to get cash flow. Cash flow divided by original investment equals equity rate of return, and net operating income divided by market value equals the cap rate. Here's IRV, I over RV. If we have an $18,000 net operating income divided by a cap rate of 9%, that means the property is worth $200,000. We're just plugging it into the circle. And you can move it all around. You can take income, NOI divided by value equals rate, or income divided by cap rate equals value. Right? Depends on what you're doing. If you're looking at things that have sold in order to figure out what cap rates are for this kind of property, then you're going to take the net operating income and divide it by the sold prices of those 8 comps that you found. Now you're going to see what range of cap rates there are for similar properties. Now, when you go looking for specific things that are for sale, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to take the NOI that you get from the financial statement and divide it by that cap rate that you discovered in your market research to see what this one specific one should be worth.
Neil,
Hey,
hey, should I give him a little hint?
yes, please.
When you go take the state exam at PSI, they will give you paper and pencil. Math is not my strongest suit. So once I sat down and once they gave me that paper and pencil, each of these formulas that or circles or T-bars that Neil has given you, I wrote them down. And that really helped me because I wrote them down knowing that I would use them eventually, and then I just pushed that paper to the side. Maybe that'll help you too.
That's good. Before your brain has time to get confused with an hour's worth of questions, and you're like, wait, which was cap was hood and the cap and the equity and that what? So write it down while it's fresh and clear. Use that short-term memory advantage from the last 20 minutes ago when you saw it in the car. You had to leave it in the car, but come in, sit down, write down whatever's your greatest chance of forgetting. Good advice. There's another rule of thumb kind of way to estimate some value, and we're going to talk about that when we get back from break. It's called the gross rent multiplier method for smaller investment properties. But let's come back in 10. Okay, got about 30 seconds to go. Let's make our way back together. Can you guys hear this music? Okay, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. I know you can hear that. I want to play something else. What about this? Can you hear this? Hear anything just then? Looking at faces. Nothing. Nothing. Okay, thank you. What about now? Hear that? You heard applause or no?
No, we don't hear nothing.
Okay. All right. Back to the drawing board. Not important for what we're doing today, but the last little bit on this slide deck is another sort of rule of thumb method. And this one is called the gross rent multiplier. The gross rent multiplier is just a quick shortcut of estimating small residential rental properties. You're out there looking for possible small residential rental income properties, and you just kind of want to know, are they asking something that's reasonable? You're using the rent that they make and a multiplier, sort of like the cap rate, but it's called the GRM, the gross rent multiplier method. The gross rent multiplier, I should say. So you know the GRM from your research. Properties like this have a GRM of this kind of rate. So you would have that already, that knowledge already. You take whatever they're making in rent on the property, multiply it by the GRM, the gross rent multiplier, and that tells you an estimate of what it's worth. Very rough. Does not have anything to anywhere near the level of detail that the given method does. This is just a quick rule of thumb, just sort of a, let's see if we're in the ballpark. It's for single family rental homes, duplexes. You would not use it for anything more elaborate than that. You wouldn't use it for shopping centers, office buildings, apartment complexes, nothing like that. So the math is just, the question might be, the gross rent multiplier of duplexes in the area is 13%. The rents collected on duplexes are $1,000 per unit. So one little nuance, the caveat there is, oh wait, $1,000 per unit and it's a duplex. That means $2,000 for the whole duplex. Don't let that fool you either. If they talk about a duplex or a triplex and they give you a rental per unit, don't forget to multiply by 2 if it's a duplex, by 3 if it's a triplex, right? Get the whole building's worth of potential income. And let's say it's $3,000 for all 3 units at $1,000 each. $3,000 in rent times the 15% gross rent multiplier would tell you how much you should spend on it. Excuse me. So that's GRM. Just another circle formula. Brings us to reconciliation. We've done, or the appraiser has done, the sales comparison method, the cost approach, the income method, if applicable. They all produce different valuation amounts, but the one that matters is the one that is most like the property in question, the subject property. So reconciliation is analyzing and weighing those different methods and then putting more weight on the one that's like the property that you're trying to determine the value of. First step is defining the problem. Remember that? Last step in the appraisal process is the reconciliation. There it is. Testable. Now let's compare that to, fill in the gaps here with a couple other little points. We talked about picking comps that are not distress sales if the subject is not a distress sale. Now, what if the subject is a distress sale? Welcome to 2008. Oops, sorry. If the subject is a distress sale, there we go. Then you would want to use comps that are also distress sales. But if it's not, make sure you use things that are not distress sales. And in the MLS, they usually say so. They would tell you what the situation, what type of sale we're dealing with. Is it an estate sale? Is it a short sale? Is it a foreclosure? So you wouldn't use any of those things if it's just a normal, regular seller not under stress to get things sold. We adjust the comparable, never the subject. We talked about inferior versus superior. Here's a little graphic. If there is a garage versus no garage, the comp has no garage and the subject does have one, we would add the value of a garage to what the comp sold for. If the opposite is true, comp has a garage, subject does not, then we would subtract from the comparable so that it too financially does not have a garage. Let's look at this example. Mitch and Mary want to sell their 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. It's on a half an acre lot, built in 1968, has a 2-car garage and a sunroom. The best comparable property was built at the same time, has 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a little bigger, one more half bath, I should say. Half acre lot, same thing, 2-car garage and no sunroom. Current sold data indicates a bedroom is worth $5,000. A bath is $6,000, a garage is $30,000, a sunroom is $45,000, and 1 acre is $100,000. What would be the correct adjustment here? Going to need your scratch paper on this one, aren't you? We don't have a sale price of the comparable, but we don't need it. All they're asking for is how much would we adjust the sales price by? We just need to know what's the max amount of adjustments, dollar amounts of adjustment. And so we just need to list out the differences between the subject and the comparable. So what are the differences? 3 bedrooms are the same. The bathrooms are different though. We've got a subject with 2 baths, a comparable with 2.5 baths. So that comparable has more. We need to subtract something. What are we going to subtract for a half bath? They don't give us a half bath adjustment. They just give us a bath adjustment. And if that's the case, then I would take half of the 6 for your purposes for the test. So here's what I'm doing, by the way. There's what my chart looks like so far. Subject has 2 baths, comparable has 2.5. I'm only going to list the differences. And that half bath adjustment would be subtracting $3,000 from whatever the comp sold for. What's next? Let's see, half acre lot, that's no different. Double car garage, no different. Sunroom. Comparable does not have one. Subject does. If the comparable does not have something and we need to add in, then that's the answer. We add something in. How much is a sunroom worth? $45,000. Is that the end of it? That's all the differences, right? So, looks like we're going to make an adjustment change maybe of 42,000. Those are the only, see, here's a case where we didn't need to do any math. All answer choices involved $42,000. We just need to know what to do with it. So adjustment would be, first of all, are we doing anything subtracting or adding to or from the subject property? Never. We're never making an adjustment to the subject. We're only making adjustments to the comparable, right? There it is. So we can rule out the subject property completely. We never adjust the subject. We don't know what to adjust from. We don't know what it sold for, therefore we can't adjust a sale price on something that's a question mark. So that leaves us with the other question: are we adding or are we subtracting? It was here's the columns. We had adding 45,000 and subtracting 3,000. That still gives us a positive number. So we're basically adding 42,000 to whatever the comparable sold for in order to get what the subject is probably worth. So there it is. Bedrooms don't matter. Acres don't matter. Garage doesn't matter. By the way, they're giving you way more than you need. So part of it is knowing which things you need. Bathrooms are different. Sunroom is different. We're adding 42,000 to the comparable sale price. Gives us the adjusted sale price. Right? So if that comparable sold for 200,000, then we would be adding 42. The subject would be expected to be worth 242,000. Right? Broker Billy has a listing appointment for a 3,600 square foot home on a 2-acre lot. The home is on the main channel of a popular lake, has 5 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, pool, spa, boat dock, boat lift, cedar shake, 3-car garage. Most recent sold that matches this home has 3,800 square feet. Okay, 200 feet bigger. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths. Okay, so 5 bedrooms, same. Bathrooms are different. Superior baths. Sold for $2.2 million. The recently sold home is also lakefront. So same thing. Boat dock, but no boat lift. 3-car garage and brick exterior instead of cedar shake. The correct adjustment, adding or subtracting for this home would be what? So we don't have to do math again. We just need to say which thing we would incorporate to make the adjustments with. Okay, so let's look at the first difference. One difference is in square feet. The comp has more square feet, 200 more. So what do we need to do with dollars to make up for that difference of the comp versus the subject? The comp has more square feet than the subject. We need to do what? Add or subtract? We're going to subtract the dollar amount that corresponds with however much 200 square feet is worth. So that's one of them. We can look down through our answer choices and see that there's only one thing that has subtract the value of 200 square feet. It rules out number 2. It may not rule out number 1 or number 4 because they don't even mention square feet at all. And none of the answer choices mention all of the differences, I don't think. Let's keep going. 4 baths versus 3.5 baths. We're going to subtract a half bath worth of value. And so let's see. We have add value on number 1, so that's not it. We have add bathroom value for number 2. That's not it. We don't even mention it on number 4. We do have subtract the value on number 3. That gives us more inclination that number 3 is correct. And then boat dock, but no boat lift. Subject does have a boat lift. So we would need to add value for the boat lift. And number 4 says subtract value for a boat lift, so that rules that one out. So it looks like number 3 is the best match. They do talk about cedar shake versus brick, but none of the answer choices talk about that one. By the way, brick is probably worth more than cedar shake, right? Probably be wood siding and vinyl siding might be kind of comparable. Depends on the age, but hardy plank, that concrete composite, is better than both of those because it doesn't require maintenance except maybe painting. stucco, hard coat stucco is on par with brick, sort of. But then there's the stigma from synthetic stucco. And in real life, the real market, would people be scared of any kind of stucco just because of what they've seen about synthetic? And then it kind of goes back to what would an appraiser do in terms of us trying to predict what it's going to sell for. So there's all of our addition and subtraction, and it leaves us with number 3. Good job. Let's recap the cost approach again. It's that principle of substitution, figuring out what something would be worth new. Separate the land value, subtract depreciation from the new construction cost, add the land value back in. It's for special purpose. There are no comps available, so it's got to have its own approach for this kind of special purpose. The concept of replacement using current materials versus reproduction using historic properties, using custom-made things. Replacement's probably cheaper than reproduction. That looks exactly the same as what I showed you already. There's our depreciation. Effective age is the renovated age. Economic life depreciation declines from 100% straight line down to 0. There's no, you don't have to get any more complicated than that. Here's some terms again. Physical deterioration is wear and tear. Regular routine maintenance types of items. Functional obsolescence, design features that are no longer in style. And then economic, you have no control over. It's not curable. It's never curable because you can't control the airport, the landfill, the speedway. Those other ones, though, they could be curable or incurable. Physical deterioration or functional obsolescence, there might be a way to fix those, but never economic. That's a good test question. Which types of appreciation can never be cured? Physical deterioration, functional obsolescence, economic, or fee simple absolute? Just to pull from something totally unrelated, right? You're like, it sounds familiar, but not applicable. The form of depreciation that is always uncurable is what? Yep, can't do anything about economic. There it is. Here's our income approach again. Let's look at it in a couple of different ways. Cap rate is comparing the income versus expenses, the investment versus the return. Am I going to make money with this investment? What would be my rate of return? Cap rate. Rate of return using net operating income and market value. We saw this exact same thing a minute ago. Let's look at this example though. Now we have a gross income of $400,000 a year, a vacancy of 5%, operating expenses of $50,000 per year, debt service of $75,000 per year, a cap rate that we want to achieve of 8%. Our original investment that we're putting in is $100,000. So what is the NOI using these numbers? Let's plug them in. Our gross income is $400,000. We're going to subtract 5% of $400,000. I believe it was 5. Yeah. And that is $20,000. Subtracting that out gives us the estimated or effective rate or effective income of $380,000. Now we're going to subtract those operating expenses of $50,000. We're not subtracting the debt service yet. But this gives us our $330,000 net operating income. We keep on going and subtract the debt service, and that brings us our cash flow of $255,000. Now we can use our net operating income to determine the market value if we know our cap rate, and we can use the cash flow to determine our equity rate of return. It looks like this. Take our NOI number. It was $330,000. Divide it by either the market rate to get the cap market value to get the cap, or the cap rate to get the market value. In this case, we want to get a cap rate of 8%. So if we take the NOI and divide by the cap rate, what was the NOI? It was 330. 330 divided by the 8% means that we would need to buy it for not more than 4.125 million. That's taking 330,000 NOI divided by 8% cap rate. Tells us what we need to spend, no more than this, in order to get a cap rate of 8%. If we spend more than this, our cap rate's going to be different than 8%, right? If we spend less than this, it's going to change it too. Okay, and then cash flow. We knew that. We knew it's 255,000. We know our original investment is 100,000. They gave it to us back here, right there. 100,000 original investment. We plug it in, cash flow divided by original investment. I keep forgetting what the cash flow was. 255. Gives us our equity rate of return. Here's our NOI formula. NOI divided by cap rate equals market value. Plugging that in, there's our 4.125. So based on the income and expenses, an investor shouldn't pay more than that 4.125 in order to get that 8%. That's the market value based on the NOI and cap rate. What about this one? The gross income is $60,000 a month. The vacancy is 4%. The operating expenses are $82,000 a year. The debt service is $450,000 a year. And the desired cap rate is 7.5%. Given all of these things, what would be the market value? I'm going to give you a little bit of time on this one. How do we do? Let's take a look. We've got a gross income of 60,000. Did you catch that that was a monthly? The first step, turn that into annual. 60,000 times 12 is a 720,000 a year gross income. Everything is rented. It'll get that. There's a 4% vacancy. What's 4% of 720? Means we need to subtract $28,800 for the vacancy. That gives us our effective, which is $691,200. That's our effective income. Now let's subtract out those pesky operating expenses. How much were they? $82,000 a year. All right, we're good on years. Brings us down to $609,200, which is our NOI. We take our NOI, divide it by cap rate, which is our desired cap rate is 7.5%. Our NOI is this. Tells us that the market value is $8,122,667. Good. The trouble areas is they'll slide this in on you. Don't forget to get annual, not monthly. Or they might make that the operating expenses are per month, not per year. So just always be thinking, is this annual? Adjust to annual so that you can do your math properly. What if they had said the NOI, same thing, but they didn't tell you a cap rate? They want you to find the cap rate. They tell you the purchase price that you're buying it for is this. Then you just plug them in. 609 divided by 8.1 million will give you the cap rate. Depends on where in the process you are, right? Are you trying to figure out what cap rates are for similar properties, or are you trying to figure out what the value of this specific property is using cap rates that you've already investigated and in your research have found out? Cap rates are this. Other things to take away, testable things, don't average the three approaches. Never average them, weight them. Give weight to the one that's the best match of the type of property. If it's an investment property, you'll give more weight to the income approach, the value the appraiser got using the income approach. If it's a sales comparison method, here we go. You will, there it is. Sales comparison approach is the one you will pay more attention to, the value you got using that, if it's a single family or land. And then if it's a special purpose, you would pay more attention to the cost approach method. We as brokers are required to provide written market analyses to our clients, whether sellers or buyers. If we're working with a buyer, we need to do a CMA for the one that they're thinking about buying. Sometimes you need to do CMAs for 2 or 3 of them because they're not sure which one to buy. They just want to know, what are the best numbers? I kind of like them all the same. Which is the best deal? So you might need to do 3 CMAs so they know which one to focus in on. So CMAs aren't all about the seller. Appraisers give value. Brokers report selling price, probable sales price. It's all an estimate. It's all just an opinion. Looks scientific, but it's kind of really not. It's sort of halfway scientific. The thing that makes it less scientific is, what do I think a fireplace is worth versus what Margie thinks one is worth? If she's used to her neighborhood, which is nicer than my neighborhood because I'm not in one, she might assume, or from her experience, life experience, feel like a fireplace adds $10,000 of value. I might think it's $3,000 of value. We should make those things based upon the area that we're doing the work in, that the property is located in, but still, it's so much a part of our own knowledge and experience. If you sent 2 different appraisers out to do the same property, they would bring back a different number, except for the fact that I've always kind of thought was funny. In real life, with a sale, with a purchase, the appraiser finds out what the contract price is before they go do the work. That just seems weird, doesn't it? I kind of would want them just to tell me what it's worth without me giving them a hint of what I want it to be worth, sort of. But on the other hand, it does give them a place to start with. And they are still held to a standard. They are still governed by an appraisal board. They can't go crazy. Some went crazy. 2006, 7, 8, 9, they ended up committing loan fraud because they drastically, against ethics and morals, said things were worth more than they really were so they could defraud the investor and split the profit, the fake phantom profit, with the other bad apples in the transaction. The bad attorney, the bad lender, the bad real estate agent, because they based it on a fake value that wasn't really as much as they said it was. It's all an opinion, it's all an estimate, but it does have to be based on real world sold comparables, real data. That still leaves room for interpretation, though, which means there's still a lot of disputes of appraisals. And back when the values a few years ago first started really going up precipitously, we ran into that a lot. The problem was appraisers didn't have comps to justify these crazy over asking price offers buyers were making. Buyers were so caught up in beating the other guy, and they had the ability to pay it. So they're like, forget this, let me just get it. Therefore, okay, I'll give you $30,000 over asking. But there were no other comps in the area that supported it. So we were running into appraisals not coming in high enough. And then sellers got to the point where they're like, oh, so you promised to pay me $350. It only appraises for $310, and you want me to lower my $350 sale price that you promised to pay me down to that $310. So the agreed upon sale price we all agreed on last couple weeks ago was $350. The appraised value came in at $310. Buyer agent says to listing agent, would your client please come down to the $310 so that we can sell to this buyer, so this buyer can get their loan, because the lender is not going to loan on this because the appraiser says it's not worth it. The lender's going to loan on this, the lower one. But this buyer doesn't have any extra money. The 3 possible solutions when something appraises for less than what the sale price is, 3 possibilities. Either the seller comes down all the way to the appraised value. The buyer could put more down payment in and go up to the sale price to make up the difference, because the lender doesn't care. The lender is going to make the loan based on $310. If the buyer is able to add $40,000 to their down payment, and therefore the seller walks away with $350 that they want, the lender's still making the loan on that appraised value. That's one of the possibilities. If the buyer has $40,000, which they quite often don't. Or they meet somewhere in the middle. That, before this crazy market, was the more common solution. The seller would say, well, I won't come all the way down to $310. I'll come down to, let's say, $330. I'll drop to $330. Can you, Mr. Buyer, throw 20 more thousand into your down payment so that I can give you $330 and You're having to pay a little bit more, but you're still ending up at the house. Or in the most brutal cases, the seller's like, forget it. You already gave me $50,000 in due diligence money. Therefore, please walk. I would invite you and encourage you to walk away because I'm keeping this 50 and I'll just get a new buyer that might possibly pay me $350. And I think that's what Danita's daughter ran into quite a bit, which is frustrating. It's awful. I hate that market. I'm glad that we're correcting. I don't miss it. I don't want it again. That ridiculously lopsided seller's market is miserable and it's not healthy. And I'm hoping to see it never come back. I would like it to be more balanced. It makes people act crazy too. Okay, a couple other things about compensation. The CMA, as we know, you cannot charge for. The BPO you can charge for. Maybe. You as a brand newly licensed provisional broker, you're going to get your new license. It's going to be inactive provisional. You're going to go pick a BIC, pick a firm. They're going to activate you. Now you are an actively licensed, currently paid up provisional broker. And you're going to have nothing else to do, maybe. And you're going to say, let me contact banks and go see if I can do BPOs for people. Well, you can't, because provisional brokers can't make money doing BPOs. You got to get rid of that provisional status. You have to be non-provisional in order to make money doing BPOs. So that's a little nuance there. Only full brokers can accept compensation for BPOs. You could do it for free. You can't accept compensation. So you could still do it, but for free in order to, again, get in good with the bank so that maybe, and also get practice. By the way, doing a CMA for a seller could be any manner of levels of complexity. It could be you just handwriting it on good old-fashioned pen and paper. It could also be you doing a fancy CMA program you can buy. Like, I think it's called Cloud CMA is one of them. Something straight out of the MLS, so like a fancy printout CMA. This is all what you might provide to a seller to impress them with. Maybe the fancier looking, the better to impress them. It could be handwritten. It could be just some agents just print off some stuff from the MLS, the pages, and they just handwrite the adjustments on the margin and they show that. I've done that before. I kind of like that because it shows that you're working on the fly. It's like, here's this and that and the other, and it's different. If everybody else is coming in with these 30-page fancy printouts and you come in there with something that looks like you really did your homework instead of it just being a bunch of stock pages, if you know your client or your potential client, that might impress them more. That's a CMA. A wide variety of levels of complexity. The BPO, especially for a bank, it's going to look like an appraisal. A BPO is going to be software. You're going to do all your math and you're going to upload it using a certain software program. Go to a website, plug in, and you got to fill in blanks. It's going to take you forever. You're going to plug in blanks in fields, do your math, plug them in, and you got to cycle through 8 or 10 pages of stuff. Just FYI. That's after you went out and looked at it and took some pictures, and you got to upload the pictures too. So you're manipulating a software, a website. I don't see you getting out of at least your first one, if not every one, in less than 3 or 4 hours. So is that $100 you're making worth it? Maybe. Again, if you're developing a relationship and they end up listing something with you, it was worth it. Here are the things you can never do a BPO for. Never for determining a loan. Never call it that you're coming up with value. You would never say, yes, I will do a BPO for you to tell you what your market value is or to tell you what your house is worth. If that's what you're advertising as what you'll do for them, that would be incorrect. You'd say, I can tell you the probable sales price. I'll do a BPO, I'll do a CMA to tell you the probable sales price. So true or false? Knowing how to do a BPO or CMA is not that big a deal. Just glance at the market trends. No big deal, not that hard. True or false? You need to crunch numbers. You need to have it in writing. You need to have it in your files. That's something else you add to your 3-year files that you keep for 3 years because you did a CMA for that listing. You never got the listing, but the commission comes in and audits the file. They want to see that you did a CMA for that one that you didn't get 2 years ago. And here are the numbers. Here's the CMA you prepared for it. And a written range for selling price. It's a big deal. Definitely a big deal. How are we doing? Questions. Last part of the chapter. Any questions there? Let me go over those. Let's look at this one. One second. Let me pull it up. Coming up. There we go. That's what I wanted. Can you see? If I zoom in here, I think you can see this problem a little better. Let's see if we can make this work. Okay, we're on page 494, and it was one of the ones someone asked about. Number 31 on page 494. Yeah. So, a little more elaborate, and I think it's wrong. I think they gave you the wrong answer in the book. I'm going to check and get some verification, indeed, if that is the error, but it'll make more sense in a minute. Okay. An appraiser, can you see that? An appraiser is valuing a subject property with 1,650 square feet, 2 baths, fireplace, and a 1-car garage. Subject comp. Subject has 1,650 square feet. It has 2 bathrooms, has a fireplace, and it has a garage, a 1-car garage. He's located 3 comps with the following facts. We've got comp 1. Get rid of this one. Got comp 1, comp 2, and comp 3. Comp 1. We'll do that one first. What does comp 1 have as different? Comp 1 has, well, first of all, it's sold for $159,000. Let's put that right here. $159,000. It has 1,550 square feet. So it has 100 less square feet. It has 1.5 baths. So it has half bath less. It has no fireplace. So we'll just do that. And it has a 1-car garage. So that's the same thing. And comp 2 sold for 160, I believe. Yep. 160. It has 1,600 feet, 2 baths, fireplace, no garage. So I'm doing that. Comp 3 sold for 175. It had 1,725 square feet, 2.5 baths, fireplace, and a garage. What else did they tell us here? Assume that construction costs are $50 a square foot. Also, value of a full bath is $2,500. Half bath is $1,500. Fireplace is $3,000. And a garage is $7,000. And then the other one is I'm going to cram this in up here because I like it better at the top. 2% appreciation. Right? Yep, that's the one. 2% appreciation is how much it has appreciated since it's sold. So a 2% appreciation. Whenever these things actually sold, the one for 159, the one for 160, the one for 175, since then the market has appreciated by 2%. So instead of 159, today this one would have sold for 159 plus 2%. Another way to say that and do the math is 159 times 1.02. If you plug that in, that gives it to you real quick. 162, 180. You could also calculate the 2% and then add it to the 159. Whichever way you want to do it. That makes more sense, that sticks in your mind better. So that's 162, 180. Now, what other adjustments? What's the difference in square feet? 100 extra square feet. How much is a square foot worth? $50. So 100 square feet at $50 a square foot is going to be an adjustment of $5,000. Right? We'll write that right here. The next question is, what do we do with it? Are we adding it or subtracting it? The comparable has less square feet than the subject, so we need to add it. You got it, Shane. The next question is the bathrooms. The comparable has 1/2 less baths than the subject does. So we need to add a half a bath to the comparable. So we can ignore the full and add 1,500 for a half bath. And then the fireplace, there is none in the comparable. There is one in the subject. We need to add 3,000 for the fireplace. The garages are the same. So therefore, we don't need to do anything about the garage. And when we total this up, starting with our 162, 180, we add the 5,000, we add the 1,500, we add the 3,000. That gives us an adjusted sales price of 171,680. Good?
Neil,
Yes.
can you check over your bathroom adjustments? Because there's different prices for a full bath versus a half.
Yeah. Are you comparing it to the solution in the back of the book?
I can't remember what I did. I think I made the mistake of just adding a half bath the first time and I didn't get the right answer. So I tried doing 2 full baths for that
So
price.
what's the difference? It's a 1.5 bath versus 2. So it's a half bath difference, right? Between the comp and the subject. So we need to add how much of a bathroom? We need to add a half a bath to the comparable, right? And so that's why I added 1,500 here, because a half bath is worth $1,500.
I'm thinking if 2 baths are, what was it, 2,500 each?
Uh-huh.
$5,000. That's for the subject. If you try to match the comparable, that $5,000 in baths, I don't know if adding 1,500 to that would be the correct answer.
Okay,
Because
say
you've
it.
got on the comparable, you got $2,500 for the full bath and 1,500 for the half. That's $4,000. That doesn't match the $5,000 on the subject. So you're really looking to add up $1,000 only, I believe. Is that correct?
So that's where I think the book might be going with the logic. But in real life and some other books I've seen, if they give you an amount of an adjustment for like a half bath and there's only a difference of a half bath between the two, then that's what you're going to add in. So I see your point, and I am going to waiting to hear back to find out the proper way to talk about it. But I see what you're saying. A full bath is 2,500. And if you add that to a half, that's 4,000. But the thing is, it's different by one half bath's worth. And the problem is telling us the value of a half bath is $1,500. So that's usually the way you do it in real life is how much is a half bath worth? What kind of an adjustment? Okay, I'll add $1,500 because this only has this. They both have one full bath, but one has a full and then the other only has a half. So, I mean, I can see both. I see both ways.
Final exam doesn't have awkward amounts for full and half baths. If they keep it simple and just say X amount is
Yeah.
for a full bath, and then X
Right.
amount divided by 2 is for a half bath,
Right.
I would probably keep it more simple.
Yeah, and I feel like keep in mind this is a textbook example, and in my experience, the examples in the backs of the chapters are not exactly what you're going to see on the class exam or the PSI. Those are going to be more straightforward. This is for testing you on the concepts we just learned in the chapter, and I would defer to what we'll see on probably more likely the PSI would be less ambiguity.
Okay, I
Right.
appreciate it.
Yeah, but I'll get some more clarification. But it's good thinking. I see where you're going with that. The next one, sold for 160. We're going to add 2% appreciation to that, and let's do it the two-step way. For those of you that like doing that, 160 is what it sold for. What's 2% of 160? $3,200. So we're going to turn that price into 163,200. You could have also done 160 times 1.02, and there's that 163,200. Okay, difference in square feet. Got 50 square feet less in the comp. So we need to figure out how much 50 square feet is worth at $50 a square foot, and it's $2,500. Just do multiplication. What are we doing with that 2,500? Because the comparable is inferior, less than, we're going to add for that square footage. Bathrooms, we don't have to do anything with on this one. They're the same number of baths. Fireplaces are the same. Garages are different. The comparable has no garage. The subject has one. We need to add a garage's worth of value. We need to add $7,000. We do that math, we get 165.7, which is 172.7, I believe. And then the last one, same concept. 2% of 175 is 178.5. The square footage, it's 75 more square feet. So we're going to take 75 times 50 to get the square footage amount difference. And we're going to subtract this time. Subtracting because the comp is bigger. What about baths? Okay, we got an extra half bath. They both have 2 full baths. This one has an extra half. Therefore, we're going to subtract 1,500. Fireplaces are the same and garages are the same. We can total them up. 178.5 minus 3750 minus 1,500. It's 173,250. So the question is asking, what is the indicated value range of the subject property? It's worth a selling price somewhere between 171,680 and 173,250. Is there an answer choice reflecting that? And there is. However, the book says that's not the right answer, and it's because the book goes back and handles baths on comp 1 differently. What the book does, instead of what we did here, it says, well, a full bath plus a half bath is 4,000. We subtract 1,500. I believe that's what they did. No, they said 2,500 minus 1,500. That's what they did. Is 1,000. And then instead of 1,500, they put 1,000 in here. And so that gives it answer C instead of answer B. Let's look at it in their solution. There it is. Comps 2 and 3 are the same, 172.7 and 173,250, but it's comp 1 that is the different one from what I got just now. And there it is. The only difference is that bath adjustment. I said 14 or 15. They say 1,000, which throws that number off. I'll get some clarity on it and let you know. But again, I don't think it's going to be quite that ambiguous on the final. How we doing? Does CMA a little better, seem a little easier than maybe it did when you first ran across it? It's just, what is superior? The thing that'll mess you up is, am I adding it or am I subtracting it? Right? And you can just pull out your hands, do that whole dealy. Here I am. Subject property, comparable property. Comparable is 2-car garage versus 1. Need to subtract. Because when your brain is tired after hour 2, you need to do the simple things to stay on track, right? We are, speaking of on track, our next one is what? This is 13, so we're going on into 14. I will post the explainer that people in Notion ask for. I'll get that posted today. If you have anything else, let me know, and I'll see you next week. Forgot which camera I'm on. Bye.